Constellation is sponsored by HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit that's delivered right to your door, chock full of everything you need to make awesome food for you and your family. For free breakfast for life, go to HelloFresh.com/freecon. That's HelloFresh.com/FREECON. One free breakfast item per box while subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/freecon. Again, that's HelloFresh.com/freecon for HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit in America. Constellation, Last Stand Media's conversational podcast, is brought to you by you. If you want to learn how to support our podcast network, head to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Constellation, Last Day Media's conversational podcast. My name is Colin Moriarty. This is Storm Shadow. Welcome to the show. He was sitting on my desk. I had to look at him. He's a wonderful figure. It's good to be here with you guys today. Good to be back on Constellation. I'm hosting a lot recently, and it's been fun. It's been cool to be with everyone and catch up with everyone. I feel a little distant sometimes in these video game trenches. Especially when you're playing things like Ayuden Chronicle Rising.
Oh my God.
Which is just so boring.
Yeah.
You know, but I'm insisting on platinuming it. Like one of the worst trophy is getting to level 50 and I'm on level 40 and I'm like, oh my God. Just like, whew. But I wanted to play because I wanted to have context for 100 Heroes, which is apparently much better. Anyway, it's good to be here with you guys today. Let's go around the horn and say hello to everyone we have together. We've never had, I don't think, this crew together before on this show or anywhere else. So this will be a lot of fun. Brad Ellis from California.
Hello.
Good to see you, my friend.
My little Gundam also.
Oh,
you got your Storm Show, I got my little Gundam.
Love it. Love that.
Sits on my desk.
Good to see you, my friend. Now, you were telling us before the show that there's a construction going on near you.
Mm-hmm.
People putting in turf. Now, you're in Southern California. Some people might not know this, but some people do replace their grass with just turf. Yeah. But I'm wondering, is that what it is? Or do you live near like a soccer field or something that's...
No, that's just, it's the first thing. They're just replacing the grass.
Right.
You know,
or you go down
backyard.
to like... I'm sorry, go ahead. Please, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, it's in the backyard. Not front yard, just the back.
Right. You go to Arizona, New Mexico, and then they don't even do that. They just have like rocks. Like, this is your front yard, is just rocks. Yeah. Kind of like, see that in Breaking Bad, actually, a little bit, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, because they're in New Mexico. Yeah. Anywhere in the desert, it's like that.
Right. It's I hadn't encountered that until I lived in Southern California, the AstroTurf thing, and I saw that everywhere. And I'm like, oh, I guess that's kind of clever, you know, so you don't have to deal with it. All right. So there's construction going on next door, but you were saying it's loud for you, but we can't hear it. So
yeah, it's quiet right now, but could come in waves. I don't know. Unpredictable.
Well, if you hear that, you know why, but I think we'll be okay. Good to have you here with us today, Brad.
Thank you.
Good to see your beautiful shining face. Rick Hoeg of Hoeg Law. Good to see you, my friend. Good to see you as always. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. I put up a video for the first time in a month yesterday, so that was nice. It's good to get back to doing things after a nice vacation in July. So happy to be here in Constellation, talking with you all about random stuff.
Cool, man. Yeah. Micah went to lunch with your wife and daughter last month, I want to say. They were in the Richmond area.
I think it was the end of June.
End of June? I thought that was really nice. And they had a good time. That was kind of cool. I wish everyone was a little more geographically close, but unfortunately, we're like spread around this huge country. And I don't think maybe people in other countries kind of get it, but I don't think they really do just how far everyone is from each other. So it's good to have opportunities like this to catch up. Good to see your face, Rick Hoeg.
Well,
Ben
thank
Smith.
you.
Good to see you, my friend from the Soyuz.
Mm-hmm.
How are you today? By the way, Ben I don't think Ben really likes that joke. I haven't pulled out in a while that it looks like he's in kind of some sort of space capsule, you know, or in like some sort of VR module of some sort, or like you're not, you know, you look like you're in a black site, I guess, or something like that. Like you're somewhere interesting. Welcome to the show.
It's not that interesting, I'll be honest with you. I don't mind the joke. It doesn't bother me or anything. I just didn't understand it the first 18 times you told it. Because I'm here and I'm like, it's just a room.
Yeah.
But I understand, like, looking at the video. But you were talking about playing I think Iodine Chronicles.
Iodine Chronicles, yeah.
Boring game.
unfortunately.
Speaking of boring games, Best Buy had Skull and Bones on sale for $10.
This is an affront. I love Skull and Bones. You take that back, Ben.
And so far, I've played 2 hours of it because I bought it for 10. I was always interested in it, but it was like it looked so terrible. I was like, I don't know. And I was like, for $10, you can't. The game's not going to be cheaper than $10, especially physically. And went for it. I played 2 hours so far, and I know that the beginning of games are slow, but so far I hate it. But I'm going to play it because I really have been. I talked a lot of shit on it over the years, so I gotta.
It's a joke over at Seasoned Gaming how much I love Skull and Bones on the Bitcast, but yeah, I have 150 hours in.
Holy shit!
I think it's a lot better than people say, but it does have to hit you in the right way. So
yeah,
you'll have to let me know.
I have a buddy who platinumed it, and I was like, "Did you like it?" And he was like, "It was okay." I mean, he says he really likes it.
You have to play with other people, right? There's no.
Well, it's an open world with other people in it, but I mostly play single player, except when we're going after bosses and things.
Yeah,
gotcha. You is it a Sea of Thieves like? Is that a term?
No,
I just coined that.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good phrase.
So yeah, because that's like just the Pirate Association. I think it's doing. I mean, that's really cheap, but I also think it's doing better than people think it is. Like from what I can tell from player numbers and counts and all that kind of stuff. Like that game was so weird in how long it was in development. It was pretty obvious they were getting major tax subsidies in some way.
It's a weird game. I mean, like it does not match up with a lot of kind of modern game design choices, which I think is one of the reasons people reacted negatively to it.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun if you like laying siege to cities and figuring out trade routes and essentially directing your own gameplay, right? Like one of the things that I really love about Skull and Bones is that you figure out, okay, I want to have a faster ship for reason X, and then I have to go figure out where the blueprint for that ship is, and then in order to get the resources, I need to figure out what I need to smuggle, what I need to pirate, what I need to steal, and that to me is a really rewarding gameplay loop.
Yeah, it sounds cool. Yeah.
The biggest distinction, I think, between Sea of Thieves is in Sea of Thieves, you are pirates on a ship, and in Skull and Bones, you are a ship with pirates on it.
I see.
That's my understanding.
That's interesting. That's deep in some sense.
Yeah,
isn't
I'm
it?
a deep guy, really.
Yeah, you are. I don't think I've ever played a game for 150 hours in my life. By the way,
wow.
Honestly, I don't think. Maybe cumulative multiple playthroughs. So like Final Fantasy VI, I may have played that for 150 hours in my life, but over like 5 playthroughs or whatever it is. I don't think I've ever, because even the numbers on PSN are definitely wrong. I want to say Dragon Quest 11 might be the longest I actually ever, and I think that was platinum was 125 hours. And I was very strict about. I'm obsessive with in-game clocks. I'll even, as I've said in the past, restart a game if I feel like the clock's busted. And I always test in-game clocks when I start a game on like a
if you leave it on pause, is it going to run? That kind of thing?
I need to know like how it works. And so I am very strict about that sort of thing. And the PSN playtimes are so wrong that it bothers the fuck out of me. So I really have no barometer for it. It says I played Witcher 3 for like 200 hours. I'm like, no, I didn't. I might have had it on,
have to
obviously.
admit then that my 150 hours in Skull and Bones does come from the main screen of the PlayStation. So it could be a different number.
Well, they're lying to you. I don't know. Maybe there aren't. Some of them are accurate. Some of them aren't. I don't know why that is.
I can't claim that it's exactly that number, but it went up whenever I would play it by a reasonable amount.
Right. I've actually, this is a nerdy thing that a lot of people wouldn't notice or care about, but I've noticed that those numbers on PSN act differently for different games, and you can see how they're engineered for different games. So a good example of this is when I was playing Tales of Kenzera. You could tell that they were directly attached to the trophies, and they would just go up by 25, 50, 75, 100. Others are attached to like quest logs and all of that, which I think is really cool. Some of them count the time that you're in game very strictly. Some of them count the time the game is on. I was very interested in that. I don't know, like if I guess we have, I don't know how we program our games to deal with that stuff. It's pretty cool though. It took me 2 years to even notice what that flagpole meant. You know, I was like, oh,
yeah.
All right, let's get into our topics. I'm going to assign my 5th grade 4-sided die that I bought with a Dungeons and Dragons Starters Guide, edition 2. I'll assign each of us a number, and we'll go on the order that the dice dictates. Now you'll have to trust me. that the dice says what it says because you won't be able to see the roll. Brad will give you number 1.
Okay.
Hoeg will give you number 2. Ben will give you number 3. And I'll be number 4. I'm rolling the
That's what
dice.
people say about lawyers. We're number 2.
It is number 2. It will probably not come through and be seen, but it is number 2. And therefore, Hoeg, you begin us off on this week's wonderful episode of Constellation. Take it away.
Nice. So I have been playing one of my favorite games this year for the past couple of weeks, not Skull and Bones, but a game called Kunitsugami from Capcom. And it got me thinking about what I like to see in terms of folklore and mythology presented in the media that I consume, whether it's video games or movies or books. So I wanted to ask the question, if any of you had a favorite mythology or folklore that you think works best in media, books, movies, TV, whatever it might be. Obviously, things like God of War have done the Greek pantheon, have done the Norse pantheon now. Assassin's Creed covers certain aspects of Egyptian mythology and things like that. Do any of you like that in your media? Do you not like that? Do you find it offensive? Anything in between?
Let's start with you, Ben.
I'm a big fan of Greek and Norse mythology. And I think this is going to sound funny for a minute. I think it goes to my love of history, and I understand mythology is, well, depending on who you ask, but mythology is not strictly history, right? It's myth. But there's something about it that hits the same, I don't know, pressure points in my brain that makes me really enjoy exploring those things. And so this kind of actually ties into Brad's later topic a little bit, but all the adaptations that we've had over the years of Greek and Norse mythology, I mean, they're everywhere. In video games, in movies and TV, with comic books, which then, of course, are adaptations into video games and TV. So, yeah, I really enjoy it. And I don't know why or when that started. I think probably I really started getting into mythology. When did Age of Mythology come out? I know they're redoing it. And I'm really
that's early 2000s, right? I'm in law school for that one.
Yeah. So I would have been in junior high probably.
It's 2002.
Okay, yeah. I think that's probably when my fascination maybe not started but deepened. And I say fascination. I don't want anybody to think I'm a mythology buff or anything like that. But I definitely appreciate it. And even to the point where I like some Roman mythology as well. I was in Rome at one point, and all of the people I was there with were I don't care about this stuff. Let me just look at the cool statues and stuff. And I'm now I want to go to the temples and find out more about this lore here. And I understand there is a distinction between religion and mythology, but so much of Greek, Roman, Norse, all that mythology and religion is so tied together, it's hard to differentiate sometimes. So yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I don't find it offensive. I don't find much offensive, though, to be fair. So I'm sure there is a case to be made for many people. Even things I personally believe, when people don't agree or don't, if they, I don't want to say blaspheme, but blaspheme them, it doesn't bother me. I just understand that not everybody has the same perspective. So, but no, I don't find it offensive. I find it enjoyable. And I love the different ways that they can be used, and how everybody who does a new one, somebody might represent Thor in a comic book. Well, this has literally happened. Different representation of Thor in a comic book, different representation of Thor in actual mythology, different representation of Thor in a movie, and then another one in the video game. And then, by the way, the next video game that comes out with Thor in it, also different representation. So I love the fact that they're very versatile and can be used across multiple different mediums. So yeah, I can dive deeper, but I want to let everybody else take it away too.
Constellation is sponsored by HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit that's delivered right to your door, chock full of everything you need to make awesome food for you and your family. Learn more now at hellofresh.com/freecon. That's FREECON. It goes without saying that everyone loves a good home-cooked meal, but the sad reality is that, whether due to time, price, access, or some combination of these 3 issues as well as others, a lot of folks are falling through the cracks when it comes to cooking great food at home with high-quality ingredients and a solid plan of action. This, of course, is why I love the very idea of HelloFresh, because they do much of the legwork for you so that all you have to do is execute on the preparation, cooking, plating, and then, of course, the eating. So here's how it all works. By going to HelloFresh.com/freecon, you can sign up for home delivery of HelloFresh's meal kits with an insane 50 meals to choose from each and every week. And HelloFresh takes care of everything, procuring supplies, crafting recipes, and getting everything to your door, items, instructions, and all. Then you come in, wielding your goods and your recipe cards and utilizing your kitchen like perhaps never before. And you're never locked into a specific plan or delivery cadence or a food type or anything else. You can customize delivery from week to week, increasing or decreasing what comes to your house, or even shutting the plan off when not needed. And the variety is insane. 50 recipes a week, as noted earlier, but spread out over tons of categories with emphasis on vegetarian dishes or meat or family-friendly fare or healthier options, and on and on. Like I said, HelloFresh's greatest advantage is that it does much of the work for you, and frankly, it can make you look like a hero to your family, spouse, and whoever else you may cook for, since you'll wield an entire catalog of recipes for posterity too. I first used a meal kit maybe a decade ago, and I actually really liked the experience simply from the perspective of broadening my horizons, encouraging me to use ingredients I've never cooked with, and executing on something new and exciting. If that sounds good to you, then HelloFresh may just be up your alley, and HelloFresh wants to lubricate the wheels of commerce even more with a special offer. For free breakfast for life, go to HelloFresh.com/freecon. That's HelloFresh.com/FREECON. One free breakfast item per box while subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/freecon. Again, that's HelloFresh.com/freecon for HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit in America. How about you, Brad? Where are you on?
Yeah, I think mythology is really cool. I don't know as much as I used to. Like when I was in elementary school, I was really into Egyptian mythology. We learned about it in school, and I thought it was super cool. It's one of my favorites out of like nations, I guess, mythology. I always loved even like the Mummy movie. I was like, oh, sick, get to see like Anubis guys in it, even though The Mummy Returns is a terrible movie, but it was still cool to see some of that stuff in there. And of course, like Norse and Greek mythology. Honestly, I'm sure God of War helped me get into it more, like a lot of other people probably did. So you covered Greek, then Norse later on. And I do like Japanese mythology. I just don't know a ton about that kind of stuff anymore. I haven't like really gotten in depth with any of it for a long time. But whenever it shows up in a game, I'm always down for some mythology. Always. Even that game, what was it? Mortals Phoenix Rising, is that what it was called?
That's right. Ubisoft.
It was interesting to see their interpretation of Greek gods and everything like that. Even though it wasn't really my style for humor, it was still cool to see like different interpretations of everything. And of course, you know, like even like Disney movies like Hercules, their interpretations of all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think mythology is really cool. I don't know as much as I used to, but I still am very interested in it whenever it comes up.
Yeah, it's funny that this topic comes up. I wish I remembered a little bit more about what was said, but I watch these various. I'm really into watching like lectures on YouTube of just various topics, and you can basically audit like Yale undergrad classes and shit by just. It's pretty cool. I've watched like entire seminars, like 14 classes, 18, 25 class things on whatever in the background, and I'm not like intensely taking notes or whatever. And one of them was about mythology. And I think it was specifically about the Roman pantheon, but this idea that these polytheistic religions had their own separate parallel worlds with rules in them. Like gods lived and died. There was conflict and love. There was like a whole, mythology to it, as opposed to the monotheistic religions, and specifically Christianity, which is much more grounded. The supernaturalism is like the crazy shit, but really it's supposed to be about like your experience in the real world instead of like watching a story take place apart and parallel to you and how it affects your world. It's kind of interesting. As far as I'm concerned, I know nothing about this shit. I always say that I don't know anything about ancient history. I probably know much more than the average person about ancient history, but as far as like, I'm a real history lover. I mean, I have an undergrad in history, but I don't really think that matters. It's just like, I love history and I know what I know about history, especially American history and all of that, and a few European things, whatever. I have an awareness of the sequence of events in ancient history, who the players were, some of the big names, but definitely nowhere near the knowledge I have of an American history. And so it's quite mysterious to me. You know,
well, and we have American folklore, right? I mean, we've gotten into pantheons and talking about kind of religious aspects of mythology, but we've got Paul Bunyan, we've got the cherry tree,
Sure.
and those kinds of things. And I think those are interesting in and of themselves, right? I don't have a feel myself for like how actually representative something like Princess Mononoke or Kunitsugami is for the Japanese people, but I can tell that they have themes about nature and kind of corruption and industry that I think are really interesting. So one thing I wanted to say as part of this conversation is that I like mythology, I like folklore, not necessarily as a representation in media of what is true about what these different cultures or people believe, but because they are useful for storytelling. And I will always advocate for storytelling being the best way to experience and empathize with the human condition, regardless of whether or not it is representative of the actual culture at hand. So I think that's part of what makes it interesting for me when we talk about things like comic books and Thor in comics, and then Thor and God of War being very different kind of characters, and what that means for interpretation. What that means is understanding Norse culture, sure, but also how those stories work differently with the same characters is an interesting aspect of mythology and folklore as it stands.
Yeah, it's funny you bring this up because especially about like kind of the mythological, you know, John Henrys and all these kinds of things. It's like I was thinking about BioShock Infinite specifically as a game that did something very interesting in that it tried to deify the founders. And it makes you thinking about an America that was either founded, say, 200 years earlier, or that, so like in the 1500s, or so somewhere around there, or had a much less enlightenment driven founding, and generally at the time it was, that you could see that these people would have been deified. They're somewhat deified, but they're not. No one calls George Washington a god, but you can imagine a reality where actually they did. And it's kind of interesting to think that BioShock Infinite was one of the only games that I ever really saw that I've played that really dealt with that. And it was specifically, I think it was Franklin, Jefferson, and Washington were like the three gods, right? That they kind of like worshipped in their symbols, like the key, and I think the sword and all that kind of stuff. It was super cool. And there was like a John Wilkes Booth mystery cult in that game and all sorts of things. And that's the other thing which was fucking awesome and lost on a lot of people that played the game. And I have no idea how they missed that. But that's the other thing I wanted to say was I watched this thing about some time ago about mystery cults and how that ties into mythologies, and I think especially in Rome. And it's fascinating that it's so unintuitive as a person who grew up in a monotheistic culture, like many people around the world, that though not all, if you're in India, Japan, other places, it's totally different. But where like you pray to a god, but not the god. Like you choose your worship and why and how, and whatever deity you kind of want to pay attention, even though they themselves have some sort of hierarchy and can do different things and help different ways and kill each other. And so interesting. It's crazy what it suggests about these cultures that they could develop and then pass this stuff on. You know, it's like so much, it's post-agricultural revolution kind of stuff. It's just like, wow, like you really have so much compared to the people that came before you that now you really can have like priests and priesthoods and writers. And
that's fun to think about, right?
Yeah,
I think that's the same as what Ben was saying with it touching history. Is it's like the Aeneid is an explanation for the Trojan War. I mean, it's not what we think is an accurate explanation, but it helps understand how oral tradition works and how cultures actually respond to these things. And I think it's good that still now in 2024, we're adapting those stories and that cultural tradition of storytelling into things like video games and movies and comic books and kind of generalized popular culture. And that leads me to one other question I wanted to ask, which is, do you have a favorite use case for these things? I know my daughter loves what I would call the modernization of the pantheon. She loved games like Stray Gods. She loves Percy Jackson, that kind of thing, where you've got, what would it be like if these folks were living right now and the Greek gods are living in a skyscraper in downtown Metropolis land, whatever it might be, that kind of thing. And then one of my favorite uses is the referencing of kind of famous or more popular folklore mythology in things like ship names in science fiction. Right. I like that little game you get to play, which is like, okay, so we know Prometheus steals fire. We know that's going to be a big change for society. What does it mean that this ship is called the Prometheus? Right. And playing that game with the creator of a story while you watch it or while you play it or do those kinds of things. Do you enjoy that?
I'll let the others, and I think Ben would have a much different answer than I do on this, so we'll go to him next. But I think much of that stuff's lost on me, to be honest. Unless you're talking about big names, there's like thousands of characters. You know, I was thinking you would appreciate this. I think that my biggest exposure, and I wrote this down to make sure I didn't forget, my biggest exposure to mythological anything are Final Fantasy summons, right? Which taught me a bunch of names that I never, like Leviathan, Odin. It's like I really know them through the scope of Final Fantasy IV and shit like that, you know. So there's like the video games, and then there's astronomy. So like the moons of Saturn, the moons of Jupiter, they all have themes. The moons of Jupiter, I think, are named after like Zeus's, or I'm sorry, Jupiter's like lovers and friends and shit like that. And then they ran out, and then they like started this whole other structure. And Saturn is all the people in Saturn's orbit, literally, in the mythology or whatever. And so like all of those, I know these names only through that context, you know? And so I think a lot of these references, like if they were going to be written into something, unless very blatant, would not even strike me as anything worth thinking about, even though, as you've just said, there's something deeper there. Ben, I'm sure you disagree though, because you have a much better understanding of this space.
I don't know. Yep, sure. I'll take that for what it's worth. As far as do I have a favorite adaptation? I don't know if I have a favorite, but I was thinking before you mentioned it, the Percy Jackson series. And I'm talking about specifically the books. The movies I've seen, but like, I don't know. I watched them like last year with my kids, and I guess there's a series.
My daughter really loves the Disney Plus show.
Okay. All right. I've never seen it. Maybe I'll check it out. I'm sure my kids would like it. I'm sure I'll at least not hate it. But I read the books as they were coming out. So like late high school, early college time. And I really liked them. Like you said, you know, the idea of all the gods living in a high rise in New York City is just like a totally different take on mythology of any kind that I've ever really seen before. And that doesn't mean it's not out there. It's just my exposure to it. So that was what was going to be my answer. That's one of my favorites. And as far as seeing how that plays out in other things, I don't know. As far as like, you know, I never probably would have put together like what, you know, the idea of what does this ship being named Prometheus mean? Like that, my mind doesn't go that deep. But I'll be watching a show with my wife Emily sometimes, or we'll be watching a show or a TV, and I'm like, that storyline really reminds me of Icarus. And she's like, what? I didn't get that at all from it. Not that, and she knows all that stuff, even as well as I do. But it is just cool to see that those different things play out. But I'm just like Colin said, I'm positive there's so much of it I have a blind spot to. Don't know the story. Maybe I know the name of someone, but don't remember all the exact details. So there's probably a lot of it that's lost on me until I go and, you know, read some think piece about it potentially as well. But I do enjoy digging into that stuff. I like thinking deeper. I love watching just stupid comedies that are, you know, maybe they have some life lessons, but they're just meaningless. But I really like watching shows that actually make you think, and whether that gets you into a mythological point of view or not. Movies and TV are like, you know, great expressions, great ways to make you think, to make you understand, to make you learn differently, I guess. And don't get me wrong, I love pointless, mindless culture stuff that is just brain rot, essentially. But I really do I like being a little snobby about it too, for sure.
Brad, where are you on this?
Oh, sure. Some of my favorite examples of mythology being used is obviously the God of War series. I think it's done really well in there. But one of them, my other favorite was Okami. I really loved how they used how you play as Amaterasu essentially through the whole game in this wolf vessel, dealing with Susanoo, getting to see all that kind of stuff, and Orochi. It really opened me up to a lot of that mythology. I guess that's how I learned a lot about Japanese mythologies, because I've heard some of those names, but getting a better understanding of like what their purpose was, like Amaterasu being the sun goddess and everything like that. Really cool stuff. I love all that stuff. But in terms of like some names, like I'll catch a few names like you guys. like Prometheus, I definitely am like, oh yeah, I know that name. Anything like Greek or Roman or Egyptian, I usually get pretty quickly. Japanese, I get a lot quickly now too, because like Susanoo's used in tons of stuff, and so is Amaterasu and all that stuff. But I definitely miss a lot because there's just, like you said, Colin, there's just so much. I can't even keep up with everything, even if I wanted to.
Well, that's what I was saying about Prometheus being the example. It's like, I know the name Prometheus. I know that it has something to do with fire.
Yeah,
but I have no idea. Like, and I assume it's either Greek or Roman, but I don't know. Like, I don't even really know at all.
And usually it's Greek. Usually it's not going to be used on the nose, right? Usually somebody that's putting it in as a movie ship isn't literally stealing fire. It's used to indicate that something of technological or secret importance is going to be imparted onto the group or the society or whatever it is that we're talking about in that context, and it's going to change things, right? Like fire did. But that's part of the game that I enjoy. I do think writers can sometimes be too on the nose, although certainly this conversation might make me rethink that position, because if you don't notice it, it might not be too much on the nose for you. But I do think sometimes writers feel like they're so smart and they're gonna write the ship name and it's gonna be the Odyssey or the Prometheus or whatever, and will tell you what the plot is going to be before you really should know. And I do have a certain sensitivity and understanding of that argument kind of against those references, but I like to see them because it makes a sci-fi world feel lived in to me.
Well, it's like any analogy or allegory or whatever. Like it just requires familiarity with the source material or like what you're trying to say, you know. I think it's funny. It's a really stupid example, but I think about it sometimes is there's and I wish I remember what episode it's in, but there's like a scene, like an entire arc in an Always Sunny in Philadelphia episode that is very clearly about that they never win awards. Now that's changed now. And I wish I remember what it was. And I was watching it with Micah and I was like, oh, isn't that funny? Like it's like a reference. This whole thing is referencing how they don't get any respect for their show. And she didn't know to even look for that. And therefore didn't get it, but upon watching it again. And that's what I was saying about Prometheus is like literally like what you said about Prometheus is more than I know about him. You know, that's so okay. Even if the ship was named that, I wouldn't even think twice about why it was named that or to even think that it was named after something, even though I know loosely what it is, but that's my own hang up. You know, like it's cool that people do that. I don't know why I'm not more like, I think I've always been disinterested in ancient history and really only kind of tune in towards the end of the Roman Empire is because a lot of it is truly unknowable. And what we know about a lot of these things is very loose. Like, I feel like there's like with many humanities, the way people speak about it is much more authoritative than what we really know about the way they did things. And it's frustrating because you're probably never going to know. It's why my mom has an anthropology degree, and I used to get into conversations with her about it. I'm like, anthropology I find so annoying because you'll never really know. Like you can't, like people that study the way cavemen lived, it's like, you'll never know if you're right or wrong. Like it's unknowable. And I think that's what's always turned me off in some way from that chapter of history. It was like, so what are the primary sources? It's like, well, this dude didn't even write, but he told his stories to like this other guy and he wrote them down. You know, it's like, oh, okay. You know, so I wonder how much we conventionally know about this space for many years. That is actually not true. That's another thing I wouldn't even know how to broach. But I know like everything about the American Revolution is true. Like, you know,
I think that's fair. I think you get the same kind of experience with science. You know, one of the things that I really like about like the Jurassic Park movie is that the scientists decided that T-Rex didn't have this issue with its eyes where it wouldn't see not moving. And so like the Jurassic Park movies fall apart on that side of things. But that's okay. And I think that there are interesting conversations to be had about what we can know and what we can't know. There was a book I was reading in like elementary school that I really enjoyed, where it was like anthropologists in the far future are trying to decide what is happening at this motel that they uncover, and they're trying to decide what like a toilet lid does, and they decide it's a crown or a necklace or something like that. And it's a really provocative kind of other kind of way to look at how our world would look to someone who doesn't have any foundational context for it.
It's fascinating.
And I think that's really interesting. It's one of the reasons I like this topic. I like mythology and folklore is that like Kunitsugami, I love, but it feels alien, right? There are aspects of it that feel alien to me. And I like that, but I could understand how some people could be turned off by that. But I like that feeling of another perspective and another culture talking through its media. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk it through with you guys.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm glad you brought this topic up. It's Kunitsugami. I played it as well. I did put about 20 hours into it, and then I stopped playing it for Tales of Genzera, and then I started playing, this ill-fated fucking 100 Heroes prequel. And so I haven't gone back to it yet. I really did like it. It became kind of repetitive after a while for me. I also feel like it got really hard. And it was very easy, almost like too easy. And then it gets really quite hard. And I don't want to say I was getting annoyed with it, but I had to put like more thought into it. So I wonder if I hope I haven't given it too much distance where I can go back and actually pick it back up. Maybe I should do that this weekend. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I think it does a good job of being the kind of game that introduces new ideas throughout its running time, which I always appreciate. And it's one of my favorites.
It's a very cool idea. It's very novel. I'm sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. I've only played a few hours of it, Hoeg, and at the beginning of it, I was like, I know this thing means something, but I have no idea what it is. Like, I'm sure I'd get so much more out of it from a story lore perspective if I understood the mythology there. But I mean, the game's, I like tower defense type games, so it's a cool. We haven't seen a lot like it. It's almost original to some extent, but yeah, as far as the story was going, I was like, I don't know. It's just
we're walking down a mountain, fighting some monsters. You know how it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it reminds me of an older game on the Super Nintendo called ActRaiser.
That's so funny you brought that up.
Yeah,
split of strategic base building and action levels. And that's always been a favorite of mine. So it was nice to see it kind of revisited unexpectedly in a Capcom game. So
that's very funny that you say that, Ho, because that's exactly the way I described it. It reminded me of ActRaiser, specifically just that it melds two unusual genres together in a similar way. That would be side scrolling and kind of like base building stuff and some light tower defense. And in this game, it does the same thing with like kind of the live action tower defense. I wish that, and did you play ActRaiser Resurrection? If you didn't, it's really, really good. I highly recommend it.
I did. They added a lot of dialogue to that game.
Yes, they sure did. I really, I've always remembered the ActRaiser fans that I've met in my life. I'll have to add you to the list because there aren't very many. That's a wonderful old NX game. I'm glad that it got, I thought that game's such a big deal for me. I have like the Japanese box art in my loft, like boxed or framed on the wall. That when Resurrection came out, in my mind, I was like, oh, this is gonna be such a big deal. Like no one gave a fuck. That ActRaiser Resurrection came out. I was like, I was so bummed out. I think I knew like 3 people that played it. So it's not as big of a deal as I thought. And that sequel, of course, was not very good. Or it went into didn't understand what ActRaiser was, and it made
it was more action, wasn't it?
Game. Yeah, it just made it into an action game. Highly recommended though for people out there.
Yeah, you were never going to ActRaiser specifically for the action levels. It's a combination package. And I have been online and in shows in various places being heard complaining about the lack of variety and novel design approaches that things like ActRaiser represent in modern gaming. And so it really did hearten me to see something like Kunitsugami make it through the AAA wars and get out and funded and be as successful as it appears to be. I know Capcom said they had sold 500,000 or that they had 500,000 players because it's in Game Pass, so it's a little hard to see. But if you take nothing else away from this segment of Constellation, check out Kunitsugami. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's interesting. You hear that number. If it's players, that isn't heartening to me for its future. Sadly, that's one of the things that I thought was so cool about it. To your point, is like Capcom is a company that you would think would be not so worried about this mid-tier game, and yet they did pursue it. And it's very weird. It's not a great title. I mean, it is what it is, but it's like it's not marketable.
It's not a great title in the West, no.
But they did put it out there, and it is cool. And yeah, Game Pass certainly helped. I think if it was 500,000 sold, I think that would be a much better sign for it. But even then, I don't think that would be a huge sign for it. It's so sad that that's true, just based on how much these things cost to make. But I'm appreciative of the game, and I'm glad that people are playing it. it's a good option on Game Pass, like you said, if you have Game Pass. But you could just buy your games if you wanted to.
I bought this one in particular. One, because I'm too stupid to go and check Game Pass when games come out, and I still haven't learned that lesson yet. But two, because I had played the demo and I knew that I wanted to get it and play it. So this is one of those games where even though I bought it while being a subscriber to Game Pass, and usually that makes me feel bad about myself, I feel good about myself on this one. I would have bought it anyway. So Konitsugami, folks.
Yeah, right on. Anything else to be said about this topic?
No, I wanted to talk about mythology and folklore in general and how much I enjoy it in the media that I consume. And I'm glad we had the conversation.
Cool. Yeah, that was good to talk about that. And I'm embarrassed about how little I have to say about it, how ignorant I am in some ways about it, but it's just can't know everything. And trust me, I don't.
You can't. Nobody can. And I don't think it's a marker of ignorance or anything that you should feel sorry about. It's just a matter of you know what you know, and some of this comes up in stories and storytelling, and you can read about it later. I liked what Ben had to say about digging in after the fact. It's always good to be able to go into a story. I talk about this when I comment on Alan Wake and say the more layers I go into this story, the more it keeps giving back. That's always a good feeling.
Yeah,
the mythology in Alan Wake, that was really cool. Some of the stuff that obviously wasn't meant to be the main part of the story, but like I took a lot from that as well.
Yeah,
and knowing some of that, that lore mythology that it feeds into, or that feeds into it. I was actually a little bit surprised by that, honestly. Not that I don't think Remedy makes thoughtful games, because they obviously do, and I've always liked them, but I was just surprised how deep it went, just in certain points.
Yeah, and Remedy's always been a wild company for that kind of thing, right? You can play Max Payne, and they have the V drug, and you go into the corporation and you find Chief Executive Woden, and that kind of thing, and that's a really interesting way to tell that story. I've always enjoyed that, but your mileage may vary on these things. I don't mind that at all.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's funny. Kid Icarus is one of my favorite NES games, and that was like one of my favorite games when I was a kid. And I guess I eventually became loosely aware that it's something to do like with Icarus, and like, but I didn't. Like, who is Medusa? It's like the last boss in Kid Icarus. Like, that's who Medusa is. To me, it's like, so that's
funny.
That's just
Medusa
how I think
was the
about it.
second boss for me in Castlevania.
Oh, in Castlevania too, as well. Yeah, absolutely, of course.
It is a little bit like only knowing Mike Tyson from Punch-Out, but
right, it's exactly what it's like. Yes. All right. Let's move on. I have the dice out here. So we've rolled our 2, but Brad, you're 1, right? Ben 3. I'm 4. Let's see if we get a different number other than 2.
Do I get to choose if it's a 2 again?
It's a 2. Yeah, it's a 2 again. So you can choose if you'd like. Yeah. Okay. Let's do that.
Let's do mythology again.
Let's do it again.
The top.
Let's do it better.
Well, let's go with Brad.
All right. Great, Brad. Take it away.
So my topic is, once again, I was very surprised this was not taken because it's such a huge topic, is adaptations. There's so many adaptations out there, books, video games, comics. But I was just thinking about game adaptations. I was like, man, what game adaptations do I really like? And I was like, oh, I like the Castlevania anime series and stuff like that. And I was thinking about even the old Mortal Kombat movie. Not an amazing movie, the first one, but still really fun, and actually gets the source material really well compared to the later movies and everything. But then I was thinking about other adaptations like books, and I'm like, well, Lord of the Rings, in my opinion, is one of the best adaptations you could possibly do out there. And I was just kind of like, yeah, what's everyone's favorite adaptation? Either a book or, a game. How about let's do a game and movie? Something like that, or show. Harry Potter is a very famous one as well. That's really good. So, start with Ben. Adaptations, Ben. Talk to me. What are some of your favorites? Let's do game let's do game property first.
All right. I hadn't thought about a game property yet, but I'm going to say the obvious answer is going to be The Last of Us. So I'm not going to take that one. I'm going to let somebody else have it.
Well, you just said it. It's already there.
Well, yeah. I mean, it is great. But because it's recently in my memory, I'm going to say I actually really, really enjoyed the Twisted Metal show.
Oh.
And I don't think it was a good show. But remember what I said earlier. I like stupid stuff and I like snobby stuff. I think it was just dumb fun. And yeah, Twisted Metal the games have so little lore to them that you could have done almost anything as long as there were cars and a clown involved, right? So like, I don't know that it was a huge feat to adapt one to the other. But I think it's really cool that they used that IP, that they made a decent show. Like, there's so much. I don't think people understand how many bad things there are on TV, whether that's streaming or whatever. Like, there is just some really, really trash stuff out there, and for it to be at least like good was pretty impressive to me. So that's probably not my favorite video game adaptation to movie or to show, but I'm gonna say that's the most recent one that really struck a chord with me. Yeah,
totally, man. They've been firing those out. There are so many game adaptations that are coming out and planning to come out. It's pretty crazy now, especially TV shows, and thankfully some of them have been really good.
Yeah,
I'm still
Yakuza soon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hope that's good. I don't know. I mean, hopefully it's cool.
You can never know.
Yeah, it's like a dice roll. Yeah, hopefully it's cool. Let's stick with the game ones first. Hoeg, game adaptation.
So I know which way I'm going to go with this one, although I want to caveat my answer that I am not a deep player of the original property. So to the extent that it doesn't fulfill whatever fans of the property want it to fulfill, I wouldn't know. And that is the Arcane show.
Oh,
I really loved Arcane, and I'm not a League of Legends player. I couldn't tell you who the characters in League of Legends in that show are, other than the fact that certain characters get like special weapons and certain looks where I say that's got to be one of the characters. But I think the Arcane show is probably my favorite video game adaptation of all time.
Nice.
Yeah, man. I've heard from people that are League of Legends fans that it's really good. They really, I guess, do respect the source material, probably because Riot's involved in it pretty heavily. So I'm sure they're keeping checks and all that kind of stuff. Like, have you guys seen the Warcraft movie?
Yeah.
It's just like, man, Arcane did what I wanted them to do with Warcraft so badly. And it's just like, man, Blizzard, you fucked up. Arcane Riot beat you to the punch like they have been doing recently for a long time now. But it's just like, so much potential there. But yeah, I didn't know League had like all this crazy lore either, because I don't really play League either. But when I heard that show came out, everyone's like, it's amazing. These characters are so great. I was very surprised. I'm like, this MOBA, like Jinx, like, I don't know. But I don't know. People love it. I haven't personally seen it yet. I would like to watch it, but
it's a great show. And in terms of talking about adaptations in general, we could talk about Riot adapting their League of Legends video game into other video games. I think they've done a good job of basically picking out characters and finding what would be an interesting video game with that character specifically.
Yeah, they're smart about it.
It's really unusual.
Yeah. They have that fighting game, I forgot what it's called, 2K. It used to be Project L, but I forgot what the title is now. But yeah, you're right, Hoeg. They are very good at adapting all that kind of stuff into even other games. Colin, video game adaptation.
So we're going specifically, and it seems like this is the case, from the video game to the TV show and not the TV show to the video game, right?
That's what we've been doing, but you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, because I just because I think there's some interesting back and forth, like Batman, for instance, and the way it ping pongs back and forth, I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But and like how things are developed in some of these games good Batman games go back to 1989, really, with Sunsoft Batman, which is a fucking sick game, and revived again, of course, with the Arkham games. But really, I mean, in the direction we're going, Castlevania, I guess, would be my answer, although only kind of the first little bit of it, like first half of it, maybe, I would say. That first season, which is very short, it's like a few hours long or a couple hours long, is so good that when it came out, I couldn't believe it. That listen, it's like I am real. There are just certain franchises and series where I'm like, it's all subjective, right? But my personal taste is exactly what I want for this. Like Castlevania, I feel like I get it. I get Castlevania. I've always gotten Castlevania. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. And by the way, most Castlevania works great. So it's not like there can't be a wide grouping of Castlevania games. It really only started to fall apart with Mercury's theme. And of course, Judgment and that fighting.
You're not a big fan of Lords of the Fallen?
You mean Lords of Shadow? You mean? Yeah.
Yeah, that's Mercury's theme.
I'm sorry. Yes, different lords.
Yeah. The first Lords of Shadow, I think, is actually pretty good. The second one is really bad, and the 3DS one was bad too. Yeah. And it's weird to have truly bad Castlevania games. That to me is unheard of. So when I tuned in, Castlevania is about a feel and a look, about an atmosphere, and about leaning into some of the things that they were not quite able to lean into explicitly, especially in the West, in the early NES and SNES games, which is the religion. And that first season of Castlevania, I'm like, this is fucking perfect. Perfect. In every way. Like, it's incredible how much they understood this. What was the guy's name? I follow him on Twitter. I've talked to him, Ari Shankar, or something like that. Adi Shankar, maybe his name is. Something like that. And he's famous. I don't mean to disrespect him. I just don't know his name off the top of my head. And I reached out to him and we talked briefly where I was like, this is fucking sick, dude. You know, like, well done, like very well done. And I think that they kind of got it going forward from there, but I think it does lose itself after a while. I haven't actually even finished it, like the spin-off one or whatever, where I'm like, you're not really getting why this works. Maybe you didn't need to do this much of it. Although obviously it's always more and more and more and more, and everyone, especially on the streaming services. So I got to give a shout out to that early Castlevania because I was absolutely shocked. And what really disappointed me was twofold. It's like, number one, Konami unlocked this. And like, I know they've been taking pitches on games for years, and I suspect that there is a Castlevania game in development. It's just like, this franchise could be, I believe Castlevania could be huge.
Yeah, I think so too.
And I think that it's got something for everyone. I think it's actually even got a bit of a not a feminism, but a feminist feel, like a female feel to it that's attractive to both sexes. The androgyny and like I think of like fucking Twilight and all that kind of stuff, you know, like there's something about that can be extracted for a mass market while keeping its like heart and soul of like gothic horror and stuff like that, or whatever setting you want to be, because it takes place over many hundreds of years. It's disappointing that they never used the aesthetic from Castlevania in a game. Like it's been going on long enough where it's like, where the fuck is the game? Like, what are you doing over there? You know,
that's
take advantage of the situation. It's crazy. You know,
yeah.
They did some great collections, like really nice, surprisingly nice collections with the Castlevania NES and Game Boy games. They re-released with Sony Symphony of the Night and Rondo, which was really cool in a package. So they know it's so lazy. And my hope is that quietly something is in development, you know, behind the scenes where it will understand Castlevania much like the show did. And obviously you brought it up earlier, and it's worth talking about around the horn if we want to, and it's up to you guys. But I think The Last of Us is a very successful adaptation of a video game. And what's impressive about it is that it's the highest quality game of what is being adapted, basically, you know, and they kind of met the bar and exceeded it in a lot of ways. It's a mass market, like people that don't play games watch this. We know this, but I know it in my own life. Like my dad watched it and loved it and shit. It's like my dad fucking doesn't care about video games at all, you know?
Yeah.
So
my
it's cool.
issue with Last of Us as a fan of the game, right? I really enjoy the Last of Us game, is that I didn't feel like the TV show added much to that experience. I felt that Last of Us already was a kind of cinematic adventure game. So you have to convince me to go and watch what are these scenes, some of which are shot for shot in the TV show. And so that is one of my lesser favorite adaptations. I agree with you, Colin, in terms of its mass market penetration and success. Although I think the better example for me on that score is Fallout. Fallout is not my favorite story. Fallout is not my favorite television show or my favorite adaptation. But I think it was the best kind of commercial for the Fallout franchise that immediately makes you want to go play Fallout. Right? Like, I like the adaptations that are not a story that you've already seen, much like I like the video games that were not identical to whatever movie came out back when we were doing licensed video games, right? I like the Phantom Menace, where you had to go to different planets and do a story around the Star Wars movie rather than just copying it directly. So I think the Fallout show is the most successful in terms of advertising what the video game represents. But The Last of Us, certainly with its HBO pedigree and the seriousness with which they took it, has been a high quality kind of adaptation. It's just not for me. And I don't think it's really for people that enjoyed the games. I think it was kind of for people that didn't play the games because they would have already seen it for the most part.
I think it was definitely more of a please come play our games or get interested in them, or just a please make some money. But I have a feeling, Hoeg, and I agree with you just to a large extent. I I just get this feeling that it's going to veer further and further as it goes on. As the show goes on, it's going to veer further from the source material.
I
whether
think
that's timing or whether that's actual story changes, I don't know. But
well, what I would have liked to have seen would be them picking up some of the time between 1 and 2, and it seems like they're not going to do that.
There'll be a spinoff. If the next couple seasons do well, they'll do a spinoff.
Yeah, I think they'll end
Fireflies.
Yeah, I think they'll. And I have no inside information on this, so I don't want to make it seem like I do. Because I do talk to Neil once in a while, but we don't talk about this stuff. My suspicion is that they'll split this, like has been said, split this into multiple seasons, and I think they have to do that, and maybe put things more in a different order, and then line up the next game with like season 4 in a more linear way. I really feel like the HBO connection is acute in this instance, in that they learned a valuable lesson with Game of Thrones, and I think just managing things a little bit better will be more successful for them, because I think they already said that there will be 3 seasons at least, right? So yeah, I can't. It was cool to see a little bit of footage of it. I'm looking forward to it coming back, but I really want to see how they deal with it, because it could. I want to know if they keep the same cadence and what happens in a similar order and at the right appropriate time. I want to see how a mass audience deals with it, because it's a very end of season 1 Game of Thrones thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
funny.
actually,
having read Game of Thrones, the original, that was exactly what I was waiting for in season 1. I'm like, well, Boromir's not going to make it. I wonder how people are going to deal with that. Spoilers for Game of Thrones season 1, I guess, folks.
Yeah, I don't know. It's 15 years old at this point, but I think people know that happens, and that's like the least of the spoilers in the entire show. Yeah. But I remember
you also know that if that guy's in a show, he's going to die. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Sean Bean, right?
Yeah. Movie, TV show, he's dead.
It's just funny to me though, because I going in ignorantly, I didn't know anything about the books at this time, and I've only read the first 2 since. I read them last year, I want to say, or 2 years ago in my pool sessions, but they're so thick. But I didn't know. I was fucking shocked. I was like, holy shit. Like, because your conventional TV wisdom tells you, it's like, oh, this guy's going to get out of this.
He's got the plot armor.
Yeah, like totally. It's like, all right, well, you're kind of just waiting. You're waiting and waiting, and it's getting closer and closer to the end of the final episode. And you're like, all right, like,
they do a good job of setting up that there's a plan to get him out of that, right? So you're on board with the TV, and you're like, oh, well, it didn't work. Like, that's one of the reasons Game of Thrones became as popular as it was, because, I didn't know what to expect. I don't know who's going to make it and who's not going to. But it's written that way in the book, right? Yeah. Like, if you read the first one, you know that it's all kind of out of the side of your eye. I think the perspective is Arya in that chapter from the crowd, and that was a big moment for HBO. So, are they going to do what happens in The Last of Us 2? Yes, I suspect they are. Is it going to be as early in the events as the game? I don't know about that. So I do worry that like the actual plot of Last of Us 2, the bulk of it takes place over like 3 days. And so I'm not sure exactly how you spin that around a television season, but it'll be interesting to watch them try.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, I love The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterpiece, in my opinion. Like, just an absolutely astounding game. I can't wait to see.
Well, this is our biggest point of disagreement, Colin, but that's all right.
Yeah, it is.
Reasonable minds can differ on these things.
I'm excited. I'm just excited to see the first game's plot and meaning was successfully transmitted in the TV show, and it was successful. The second game is much different and much more bold. And I want to see how people deal with that in the public consciousness.
It's much more divisive, I'll say that. Because, like, Last of Us Part 1, unanimously loved pretty much. Part 2, not so much. So, yes, like you guys are saying, we'll see how they do it.
But it's a case but it's a case study, right, about why people don't like it too.
Yeah, of course. I think if they flesh some stuff out and the thing doesn't happen as early as it does in the game, I think that'll make it a lot more okay with people. Like, that was one of my criticisms with that game, is I needed a little more time before we got to that moment. But we'll see.
You got a lot of flashback episode potential there, I think.
Oh, dude. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So much potential. Let's talk about quickly just some non-gaming adaptations. I brought up Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. What's some of your favorites there? Ben, let's start with you again.
Yeah, definitely my favorite of any of them is Lord of the Rings, and I think on this show and many others, I've gushed about Lord of the Rings endlessly. But that's a specific one, but a very wide example for me as someone who, as long as I can remember, loved superheroes, loved comic books, stuff like that. Just the entire Marvel and DC, even though the DC movies aren't that good and recent Marvel stuff isn't that good, I still love it.
Mhm.
All of those universes are cool to me. They're meaningful to me because there have been very few story arcs and story beats that, at least that have harkened back to the comics, that I don't remember reading. Like, now granted, I didn't go out and buy all the comics every week or anything. I'd read compendiums, or I'd go on, different websites before there was Wikipedia, and dive deep into these characters, or go and sit in the comic book store and pull out like the Marvel Journal or the Marvel Dictionary, and read through that. But like, there were definitely so many cool things and storylines that people are like, that shouldn't happen. Like, I know Robert Downey Jr. is playing Doom, and a lot of people have a problem with that. I'm like, well, I don't know if you know this. There's actually a storyline where Iron Man, or Tony Stark, becomes Doom. Like, so just like having all those different things to pull from in the different universes. They're stupid. Some of the plot lines are really dumb. Some of the movies and shows aren't that great. I get it, but like, that's my favorite very broad adaptation, is just having all of those things brought to life. And man, I was like, when they announced, first of all, like the early Spider-Man movies, they were all great and everything. But when they announced like, we're making Marvel Studios, I was like, am I dead? Like, is this real? Is this possible that this is happening? And then when Iron Man turned out to be awesome and be a huge success in 2008 or so, I've told this story before, but I'll never forget. I had an Iron Man backpack at one point, and there was a kid who would make fun of me for it. And I remember going to the theater to see Iron Man when it came out, and I was friends with the guy who was like the manager at the theater. And he I came like right before showtime. He let me in. I got to sit wherever I wanted. And there was this huge line. And that kid who used to make fun of me for my Iron Man backpack had been waiting in line for like 4 hours and was at the front of the line. I just remember being like, "Hey man, how you doing?" And like, I never said a word about it.
Did you flip him off?
No, but he knew, and I knew.
Yeah.
Maybe he didn't know, but I knew. And that was, yeah. But anyway, just having those movies and having that be translated into a different medium. I know at this point it's just a cash cow, and they're just going to milk it and probably kill it eventually. But I still love it. So that's all that matters to me, is if I like it.
I actually think like the slow destruction of the MCU is indicative of how impossible the MCU project was, right? Like, I remember sitting in Infinity War and being like, this is impossible. What these writers and directors have pulled off here to give the different flavors of characters in their own movies, all in this particular conflict, is impossible. Like, this shouldn't work at all. And I think you're seeing how difficult what they pulled off in the first 3 phases was, in how much they're struggling right now.
Yeah. I think I'm hoping we're going to see, with comics, you had a time where comics almost went away. Like, it was not profitable for a while there. And then it came back stronger than ever. And then that was before the movies started coming out, or at least as we know them, modern movies. But I'm hoping that that's what's going to happen with the shows too. Like, it was a huge boom at the beginning. We're struggling right now. Hopefully that changes and reverses course.
Mm-hmm. I would love that. I want more good things that I enjoy. Absolutely. I'm not a hater on that side.
No, me either.
All right, Hoeg, let's hear from you. Adaptation, non-gaming.
Yes, so I have a couple of answers here because I'm a lawyer, so I cheat on these things. But my first is that I love the book Dune. I always have. It was one of my favorites. And Denis Villeneuve's Dune series here is just fantastic. I was so happy to see Dune 2 on the screen this year, and for it to capture what I cared about, right? Like, you can see online that there are differences between the book and the movie, and that different people are upset about those changes. For my purposes, what I remember the most about Dune and how societies work and what these various things mean in that story, the adaptation was perfect. And isn't it fun for, as Colin said, with Castlevania, to have what you care about in the original primary source material translate exactly how you would think you would do it if I were a brilliant, gifted Hollywood director, which I am not. And very often we have the opposite of that. We have the disappointment, right? This is what I love about this thing, and you didn't bring it over. That you didn't. You said that wasn't important. I don't care. And now this new thing is not something that I love. And Dune for me is basically the perfect adaptation. Lord of the Rings is the obvious answer for the best movies. I love those movies. I watch them frequently. But Dune, to me, just blew me out of the water because it's almost an untranslatable book because of all of the politics and machinations. And I thought Dune 2, in particular, was basically perfect.
Nice.
Oh, you and I disagree on a lot of pop culture media stuff.
That's okay.
This is one that I know. Yeah, absolutely. This is one that we are very much aligned in. I thought it was near perfect.
Yeah.
Near perfect.
Awesome movie so far.
Yeah.
They're doing more, right?
They are. They're doing Dune Messiah.
Yeah.
Okay, sick.
And a TV show, which
I
have hopes
it's
for. I don't know
HBO.
if they're good or bad hopes, but I have hopes.
I have hopes too. It's a Bene Gesserit show, right?
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting.
Colin.
There's so much lore there to dig into.
Yeah.
They should have material for
Forever.
Hopefully they do it well. Yeah.
All right, Colin, let's hear from you.
I guess I have three things that would come up. So the first would be, because it is one of my favorite movies of all time, is like, so I guess, and this is an adaptation, is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, being an adaptation of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the 1964 Roald Dahl book, the movie 1971. I mean, the book is very different from the movie. The movie is looked at as a bit of a bastardization of the book, and that's why it's interesting when they tried to do the Wonka movie in the early 2000s. There's another one now I haven't seen yet, like a prequel, which I'm actually interested in seeing. And I actually,
just Wonka? Yeah, it's not bad.
Not bad.
It's not
yeah,
bad.
I'd like to see it, and I buy that as being like us as being in the 1971 universe. I think that's kind of cool, and so yeah, I have to check that out. So I have no insight into that, but into the early 2000s movie was a much more accurate representation of the book, and I actually just don't think it was. I thought it was pretty bad actually, but it certainly wasn't nowhere near as good as the 1971 Willy Wonka movie. So that is a somewhat faithful adaptation, but not really, and it's excellent. It's better than the source material, in my opinion. And I like the sequel, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator or whatever, the book sequel, which they never got to. And you could tell it was made in a quainter time, because if they had that kind of success, I think it was a moderate success. It wasn't like a huge success. They would have made a sequel with all the right players. It wasn't until it got into like TV syndication and shit that Willy Wonka became like a huge hit, a couple decades later.
Yeah, they would have done that with the Wizard of Oz too, right? There's
right, of
like
course.
A ton of books for that.
Of course. And then I guess it's parallel to The Last of Us because it's such a huge inspiration for it, but The Road, the 2009 John Hillcoat film. This John Hillcoat guy I was reading about is like just really a random director. He hasn't really done anything. This might be the most notable thing he's ever done. And I thought it was a really accurate representation of what I felt like The Road was. As far as the book, I was, as the audience knows, The Road's like my favorite novel. I think that book is incredible. And what's so cool about it, and though it's the inspiration in some way, clearly, for The Last of Us, it's so much darker than The Last of Us. The Last of Us, there's like a bubbling of hope. Many people are alive. There's some semblance of order in places and stuff. Like The Road is, they never tell you what happens. Oh, I'm sorry.
I said giraffes.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure they really. I think it's indicated in that there's like an ecological disaster in The Road that causes all this to happen, volcanic eruptions or something like that. And it's truly fucked. And it's like an emotional book and an emotional movie about like slow death and trying to find a glimmer of hope or living for some reason. The way it dealt with like the flashbacks with the wife character, Charlize Theron played her, was really good. And I'm looking at the movie poster now, and it's funny. Robert Duvall is on the movie poster, like his name, and it's like he's in it for like 2 seconds. So obviously there was some sort of like, we need to have your name on this poster to draw some people. Viggo Mortensen, of course, was great in the primary role, but I got to give a shout out to that movie adaptation because I actually think it's very successful, and I would be very hard on it if it wasn't. I think it's actually surprisingly good. And then finally is just the Nolan Batman movies. Now, I can't speak to the level of adaptation and accuracy from the comic book source material because I don't care about comic books. But as far as Batman as a character and someone I'm interested in, it's like the Nolan movies are masterpieces. And all three of them, I think, are excellent. And just made them, as I've said many times, into films they feel right. It set a different cadence for Batman now that where nothing is going to feel right if it's not this darker, more brooding style, which I think was copied. What's the newest one? The Batman. I saw that.
Yeah.
I saw that in the theater. Again, too long, but pretty successful. And it felt kind of like it was trying to be that level of Batman in some sense. And I think that's why it was successful.
It harkened back very much to the Detective Comics Batman.
Yeah, that's what I loved about it. Yeah. I loved all the detective work in it and stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, even
people who didn't like that movie thought it was a good adaptation of early Batman and stuff. Yeah. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, even like the Tim Burton movies really set the tone of Batman movies, setting that darker tone.
Sure. I like those movies too. Those two films are good too.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Nolan Batmans are really kind of a response and almost an adaptation of the pop culture's understanding of Batman from Michael Keaton through George Clooney, right? So like that's a response, not necessarily to the comic books early or otherwise, but to how we felt about Batman after the kind of Schumacher era. And what I love about Nolan's is that it does take it and makes it a Heat movie as part of the Batman mythos and say, what does this actually look like in a city that you would recognize, rather than Tim Burton, who puts it in a fully kind of cartoon aspect, as did Schumacher. And that's an interesting perspective. That's the fun of adaptations, right? And sometimes that means you're not going to get exactly what you want from that crossover. And it's going to work for some people and some creatives, and it's going to not work in other instances, as we see very often, aka Borderlands.
Yeah. Man, I'm stoked for that Penguin show. I hope it's good. That's coming out on Max. Colin Farrell, isn't it? Yeah, he was great as the Penguin, man. That was so cool. Oh, one final adaptation shout out that had no business being as good as it was actually the One Piece live action. Like, I still think it's the worst way to experience it, but it was pretty good, man. I watched it and I was like, it's not bad.
When I promised I had a second answer, I do want to shout out one that I really enjoyed that I wasn't expecting to, which was the Sandman adaptation that was on Netflix.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of niche comic from Neil Gaiman. And I knew of them and I had read some of them way back in the day. I'm not a big comics guy, but that show, which I know took a number of liberties, was one of my favorite experiences on Netflix when I subscribed to it. So I do want to shout that out because it is one of my favorite adaptations.
Nice. Cool. Colin, I am satisfied.
Oh, good. Topic. All right, excellent.
Got some nice answers from everybody.
Very well. Well, let's raw dog this episode then, because we're going somewhat quick. We usually stop after 2 topics to bank, but I don't think we need to do it today. I'm going back to the die. We'll see what it comes up with. Oh my God, it lands on 2 again. It's incredible.
Wow. It's just my lucky day. Well, let's go with Ben.
Yeah, let's do it. Ben, take it away.
All right. So it's funny because I was the last one to send my topic and Brad suggested 2 topics because he thought one had already been done. And his second one was the same as my first one. And I literally just have a notepad or a note document on my phone where I'm like, oh, this is a good idea. And I'll write down one word for a constellation topic, because if I don't do that, Micah sends out the thing asking for topics. And I'm like, hell if I know. Like, I don't know. So anyway, it's just cars. And I'm not like a huge car guy. Actually, what I actually wrote down was driving / cars.
Oh, I thought we were talking about the Walt Disney World changes, no?
No, believe it or not. You know, that's like one Disney movie I've never seen. I've never seen Cars. No.
I haven't either. I've never seen it either. Yeah. But I've never seen a lot of things.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So Brad sent it out, and it was something that I had already thought of too. And I just I like cars. I don't know that much about, like, my buddy Brandon can look at a car and tell you what it is for the most part. Maybe not the exact year, but he can pretty much identify it from a distance. I'm like halfway there. Like there's certain cars I can tell you exactly what that is, maybe even what engine's in it, but probably not. I've never been someone who's collected cars. I'm not in a position where I ever had a fancy car. I look at cars as a utility for me and a luxury that I get to look at. Like that's what I like. Like I don't need a fancy car. I like just the fact that I have a car that drives. That's perfectly fine with me. But I did when I was in high school and college, my dad and I built a 66 Chevelle. That was fun. I know how to work on cars. I can change my oil. I can, swap the tires. I can fix a flat. I can do a lot of stuff with a little bit of help from YouTube. No problem. But I really just enjoy, like, do cars, intrigue you? Does the power of them intrigue you? Does the look of them intrigue you more? Are you more interested in driving a car, minus Colin, or are you more interested in looking at a car? Is it a utility? Is it a luxury, etc.? And Brad, since this was our combined topic, I guess to an extent, maybe I'll ask you next. I personally, I have a Subaru Impreza. It's 2022, I think. I bought it in 2023, and it's good for this area. It's all-wheel drive. Subarus are great for Western Pennsylvania. There's so many of them here. It's white, which I didn't prefer, but that's the one they had, and I needed the car because our other one got totaled, and I had to go with what they had, and that's the car I wanted. For me, it's like, it's great. It's nice. It has like some features that I like, but really, I just like the fact that it goes in the snow, it goes in not the snow, and it can fit my family of 4, and our dog can ride in the hatchback. That's what I like about that. But I like looking at souped up Subarus and think they're cool for other people to have. So, Brad, how do you feel about cars? Do you like, what's your feelings?
Yeah, I think cars are cool. I'm not like a super huge car guy. Like, I think cars are cool and I really like them, but I can't like name every car like that. I don't know everything about them. I'm not like Brandon, I guess, where I could look at a car and be like, oh yeah, I know that year.
Oh, you like cars? Name all of them.
Yeah, van, truck, SUV. There we go. But yeah, I'm kind of more like you, Ben. My car is a utility mostly for me. I think they're sick, and maybe if I had like a lot more money, but I don't think I could ever see myself being one of those people that like buys a Ferrari or some shit like that, like $100,000 cars. I think I'd just be like too paranoid to drive it. I'd be so worried about it. If just anything happened to it, it'd cost me so much money. But yeah, cars are cool, man. Of course, growing up, when you're younger, you love cars and all that shit. And I remember like Fast and Furious when I was in high school, early high school. I was like, everyone was into that stuff. It was so cool. Everyone loved that stuff. But I've never like had like a crazy car or anything like that. I've had my only 2 cars I've had have both been Honda Civics, and I've loved both of them. They've been really awesome and reliable cars to me. So I usually just go for the practicality more so over that kind of stuff. But I don't know, man. I think cars are awesome and stuff. And it's so funny, like how certain people act when they drive certain cars. Like, no offense to anyone out there who drives like a Dodge Charger or a Chevy Camaro, the newer ones. Always the biggest dickheads on the road whenever I see them. Always. And I don't know what that is.
Said that without knowing what the rest of us drive. So I think that's impressive.
Exactly. At least here in SoCal, that's the way it is. And it's just insane. And it's really interesting seeing like trends in cars, like what becomes popular. Like right now where I'm at, Teslas are very popular. Yeah. I see Teslas like everywhere. Everyone has a Tesla around here, and it's crazy. And it's just interesting to see the fads come and go of certain cars. Like I remember there's like a Suburban fad and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like big time earlier in like the early 2000s and the 90s, and Toyota Camrys were really popular for a while around me. But yeah, man, I think cars are sick. I admire them. Like you see like a really fancy sports car. Of course I'd like to drive and all that kind of stuff, but I still don't know enough. I don't know if I'd be the kind of guy to spend a couple $100,000 on a car. I've never had that much money, so I've never even had to think about that kind of stuff, but I think they're cool, man. I know how to do like the basic stuff, Ben, like change tires and oil and stuff like that. And like you said, a little help from YouTube.
Changing a tire is like so, I know that is basic, but it's like so foreign to me. It's like, I would never fucking know what to do with that.
Colin, you hire guys to hang paintings in your house.
Yeah,
I don't think we expected you to know how to change a tire. It's fine.
I want to make sure they're straight. Man. I don't want that kind of pressure.
AAA is the right call.
Yeah, sometimes, AAA is the right call. And
I don't want that kind of pressure.
There's nothing wrong with that. You just do what you're comfortable with. Yep. So
for me, learning how to work on cars for me was a necessity, not something I like doing. I still don't like doing it, but like, especially when I was in high school and college, we weren't rolling in money or anything. And so if my brakes needed changed, I couldn't afford $600 to go get somebody else to do it. I bought the parts for $110, and my dad and I lifted the car up and did it ourselves and spent 4 times as long, but it's like, we we didn't have the money to do that.
That's totally something me and my dad would have done too, man.
Yeah.
Same thing.
It's now, like, I mean, I can change my oil, but where I bought my car from, oil changes were got it included in the package. I'm sure I'm paying for it somehow, so I'm like, whatever, I'll just take it there and let them do it. And when I need to, I'll change my own oil again. But again, none of those things are things I've ever liked doing. They're just things that I learned how to do out of necessity, and I'm happy that I know how to do them now. Fortunately, I'm in a place where first of all, I don't have a car that needs a lot of work right now, but when it does, maybe I'll be able to afford it a little more, whether I want to or not. Whether I want to pay somebody $600 to do my brakes as opposed to just doing them myself is a different story, but maybe I'll be able to afford it. But I'll tack on to that, Brad, before we go to Hoeg. Yeah. Also, since we're talking about cars, do you like driving? How do you feel about driving itself?
Yeah, I like driving. I mean, I don't like driving for 5 hours straight or anything like that, but I do enjoy actively driving. I think it's fun. I mean, it could be great and terrible where I live, because I live in Southern California. The traffic can be fucking god awful. But when it's like not rush hour or anything, dude, I enjoy driving a lot.
Yeah.
I don't like sitting in traffic, but yeah, I think driving's fun.
Yeah.
Also, I'm just curious, everyone's first car, I would like to hear as well. My first one was a Honda Civic. So, Ben, what was your first car?
My first car, my grandmother had a 1990 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme.
Nice.
I remember riding around in that thing when I was a kid, when we'd go to visit grandma, and I'd stay with her, and we'd go to the grocery, or we'd go to the farmer's market or whatever. And I always thought that car was sick, even though it was just an old lady car,
Yeah.
And when she stopped, yeah, exactly. When she stopped driving, she gave it to me. I was the oldest grandkid that needed a vehicle that didn't have one yet. So that was the first car that was mine. And that thing was a tank, man. I hit around here everything. There's animals everywhere. So like I'd be driving down, and then I had to go on back roads to get everywhere. I hit deer with that thing. I hit a coyote once that took out my fog light. But that thing, I'm telling you, like multiple deer, I hit multiple deer, and multiple deer ran into me. And somehow I never got a dent. Like the worst thing was a deer. I looked to my left one time, and a deer was running straight at my car, and it hoof print made a dent in the door. And other than that, I never got a ding on that thing. The first car I ever drove was a Dodge Spirit. It was my parents' car. They let me, use it before I had a car. But my first car that I owned and put my own CD player in was an Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme.
Cool.
Hoeg.
Yes.
Go off on cars.
My first car was a Pontiac Bonneville.
Nice.
That had its own issues and ultimately died on me when I was in the middle of college. But it was my first car. It was nice. I have to be boring on my answers here with cars in general, which is to say I'm a utilitarian on this stuff. But there's so much to consider. So, like, I run a law firm. I am going and talking to clients. I am meeting with them, and they are judging me on various aspects of what I present. Yeah. And that's my clothing. That's my car. And you might think, oh, well, then he needs a fancy car. He needs fancy clothing. But in all honesty, with what I do, which is entrepreneurship and helping smaller businesses and working with venture capital and things like that, if you get too much into the high-end cars, the Beamers and the suits and whatever it might be, that can be its own version of off-putting to potential clients. Yeah. So that's one thing I'm thinking about when I buy cars. The other is that I'm in Southeast Michigan. So that means two things. One, snow and ice. Two, you might well have some important connection either as a parts manufacturer or directly for the big three. So one of the things I was told very early on in my career when I was at a big law firm was that I couldn't drive the Camry that I had to one of our clients because one of our clients was deeply connected with the automakers here in Detroit. And so that was eye-opening, and just knowing those kinds of things in this area was important. But now, as a head of household for a family of four, what I was looking for was essentially a light SUV that had room to move and would otherwise stay pretty straight and pretty controlled in ice and snow. So I'm currently in a Ford Escape, and honestly, it's my favorite purchase of a car that I have made.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Do you like driving?
No. I'm not a big fan of driving. Mostly my memories of driving are of frightening almost accidents, right? Like that's what I remember being in Michigan my whole life, and not like enjoying the little leaves kicking up behind the rear tires as we go through a delightful looking forest or anything like that. So I'm not a big fan. No.
Yeah. Now, Colin, I know you don't drive.
Nope. Not
and
anymore.
I know you have driven in the past.
Yeah.
But tell me more about, first of all, your feelings on cars in general. Do you like them? Do you hate them? And then if you want to dive into your driving history or lack thereof.
Yeah, well, yeah. The only car, my first and only car that I owned, which my dad procured for me, was a 1991 Ford Ranger.
Cool.
He got it from one of his, I don't remember the guy's name, but one of his friends in his firehouse in New York City was getting rid of his car. He bought it for $1, I guess, like as like kind of a friendly transaction. It was in great shape, and it had an Alpine sound system in it, which was like, I like couldn't believe my luck. You know, I was like, this is so great. So I drove that a little bit. I think I had that for like a summer or like a season. And then I went to college and never really came back, and ended up ultimately selling that car over a 3,000 mile distance when I was running out of money during my internship at IGN. And I sold it to one of our neighbors, and I sold it for $500, I think, which is like ridiculous because it was probably worth way more than that. But I just needed like any sort of money. And then it was my friend Brian actually that bought it. And he then got like the car got robbed and the system got taken and all that kind of stuff. I was like, geez, man. So yeah, that was the only car I ever owned. When I lived in San Francisco, I did drive a Yamaha Vino scooter for 3 years. And I was recently telling Micah that, first of all, and I'll just say it now. I had in New York, you get your learner's permit, and then you get your junior license, and then you get your license. And you don't have to get your junior's license, but the junior's license basically allows you to drive to work and to school and shit like that. But everyone would just do whatever they wanted. Once you got your junior's license, you were just like, yeah, I'm just driving wherever.
Of course.
But it was literally supposed to be like, you go to school, you go to work, and whatever. But we would I didn't know anyone that didn't do that. So that was just like the way it was. And then you get your license when you're 18. I was 17 when I went to college, so I never got my license. And I think you have to take driver's ed and shit like that to be eligible for it earlier, and I never did that kind of thing. So I just never had my full license. And then when I went away to college, I went to college in Boston. You don't want a car there. I mean, that's like one of the worst places to have a car. The city's a fucking nightmare. It's like Paris, where it's just built with no rhyme or reason, and just circling around and everything. Everyone hated driving there. I was so glad I didn't have my car there. Also, you had to pay for your parking at Northeastern and all that kind of stuff. So the car just was at my dad's on Long Island, and then those 2 summers I went to San Francisco. Those first 2 summers to be at IGN. And I had no money, and I just lived with people. And actually, the office at IGN at the time was in Brisbane, south of San Francisco, and so you would have to drive there. But which is why I later got a scooter when I worked there full time. But I never had a car. And then by the time I got back, I sold that car, and then I was in Boston. I never lived on Long Island again after that. Then I moved to San Francisco after college in 2007, and I needed a car, but I really couldn't afford one. I would take a train, like a bus, to a train station, get picked up by someone, go to work. Mark Ryan, my boss at the time, he would like just pick me up on his way. And then eventually, he was a big motorcycle guy. He really convinced me in the fall of 2007 to get a scooter. That's when I bought a scooter. I rode that thing for a few years. Then I lived deeper, or like more closely inside San Francisco. I lived like on the edge of San Francisco in a place called Daly City for a couple of years. Then I moved into San Francisco. I sold the scooter. I took the train to work. I just never needed it. I lived in LA for 2.5 years, in Santa Monica, which is massively walkable. It's like the only truly walkable part of the entire county, basically.
Yeah.
So I just never encountered a time. And then Uber came out, and I just kind of got the ball rolling where I'm like, I've never driven, as if I grew up in a city or something. But really, I grew up on Long Island, where you need a car. I just got out of there. My birthday's in October. It was just that weird time where I started early, and I graduated. I started my senior year at 16, right? And so I was just a year, but I felt like I was a year behind everybody all the time with everything that was going on. So I never had that full year of like, yeah, you can get your license. Like you can go places. Like by that point, I was in Boston. But I also don't like driving. when I moved to San Francisco, so getting back to the scooter question, and I think it's okay to say this now, it's not really that big of a deal, is I had my learner's permit in California. And then you can get your M license and then your standard license. Your M license is like your motorcycle license. And you have like permission to drive with your learner's permit, like a scooter or motorcycle to practice or whatever. And I just never got my license and I drove that scooter for like 3 years.
It's a lot of practice.
Yeah, it was a lot of practice.
It's a lot of practice.
So I had plates and like insurance and shit like that, but I just would re-up my learner's permit every year, which was legal, common. But it's just like a loophole, you know?
Right.
And it was because I didn't want to drive a car. And there was a guy I worked at IGN named Stephen Ng, who I haven't heard from in years. He was an interesting guy. He was a nice guy. He was one of my first connections there, actually. He was in charge of the Game Facts competitor that IGN did, which was called IGN Facts. And I would he would let me drive his car around. I always forget what it's called, but there's a basic, it's not unused, but it's not trafficked as heavily as they thought it would be. This highway right below San Francisco, the movie Bullet had a famous chase scene in it that was filmed on this road. I can't remember. It goes through San Mateo State Park, and I think they interpreted it after World War II as like this artery between two places, and then they built the highway, and so it's open, but no one really uses it. It's very strange, actually, considering how crowded that area is. And so I would drive all around there all the time with his car and like practice, but I just never went through with it. And now I'm in the position now where I live in a place where you really have to drive. But the beauty is I don't go anywhere. And so my wife obviously drives, and she drove a Honda Fit for a long time that she brought into, she had when we met each other. We ended up selling that and going and buying a 2024 Subaru Impreza, which is nice. It's really nice. She likes it a lot. I must say, like, this is my only experience in like deeply in any sort of car situation, because, as the purchaser or whatever, I was involved in kind of just the paperwork and kind of the looking at the car and all the rest. And I've never done anything like that before. And I was surprised. So you guys will appreciate this, I think, is that this is what's so weird about me in cars is that, and by the way, to answer your top line question is I think cars are really cool. Like they're amazing machines, and they're pieces of art. Like some of these things are beautiful. And the real irony of all of this is that my dad is deeply, deeply a car person. It's not like he's like a car like appreciator or he has a nice car. He has several nice cars, and he's always loved, and he's always had multiple cars, and he's always loved them, and like can just spout shit off like, oh, look, there's a fucking 48 blah blah blah. I'm like, I don't know, man. How do you even know that?
Dagan's kind of a car guy too.
Yeah, and Dagan got it for my dad a lot. Yeah, so like Dagan's a huge car guy too. And then there's me. Also, my sister Allie, my sister Dana doesn't care. My sister Allie is also a car person, a car woman, and they all got it from my dad. And they all like drive really nice cars. And like my brother, I think, drives like an Audi. My dad drives a Mercedes. My sister drives like a nice Japanese car. I don't know the exact brand. And I've never related to that really. And it was awkward for me because I knew that it was important to my dad. My dad would basically always, like, starting in the 90s, would like cycle. He'd have like his car, his everyday car. He drove like a Civic for a while, an Explorer for a while, like he had an Xterra for a while, like all these random things. Then he would have like his really nice truck. He has this truck that he actually gave to my sister Allie that he called Lassie. And it was like a 43, or not a 43, because that would be during the war. It would be like a 46 or something, or 47, beautiful, pristine Chevy truck. And that was like his baby. And then he had this other car that would cycle through that he would work on and often flip for like another car. And he still does that. Like where he just likes working on them and kind of tinkering with them. And he goes to car shows and he fucking bids on cars online and shit. Like there's this whole thing where my dad is like, I don't know, man. And meanwhile, I grew up around this kind of thing and I'm like, I don't want to really drive anywhere, to be honest. I don't really care. But I think it was just it was happenstance where even in high school, I grew up down the street from my high school, so I just walked to school. My best friend lived across the street from me. I had another friend who lived across the street and another friend who lived down the street, and everyone drove. It was like, there's just no reason for me. I was just carted around. Yeah. And I worked down the street like a mile or something. I used to just drive my BMX to work in like 5 minutes, So I just think it was like, I just never needed to do it. But I could see in hindsight that my dad was like setting me up to being like, buying me the car and all that and be like, you need to kind of like do your own thing. And then me never really being back in that situation such that it just never came to fruition. And then I feel bad sometimes that I don't drive here because like we go out to dinner once a week and Micah drives to that, or like Micah goes and does the supermarket shopping and all of that. But I really do feel, and she can disagree, she's feel free to disagree on one of the shows or whatever, but it's like I don't really ask to go anywhere or do anything. So like I'm totally self-sufficient in a lot of different ways. And I lived in this house before we even met for almost a year where I would take Ubers or like get delivery, food delivered and all that kind of stuff. I was actually totally fine. I kind of like just being alone, and I don't want to say I'm stranded because this is a very walkable neighborhood, and I'm like, it's not like the middle of nowhere. It's a very suburban place, but
it's not on the beaten path though either.
No, that's true. Yeah. And so it's like when people say, and I think it's funny, it's like, that I never leave my house. It's like, no, it's more that I never leave my neighborhood. And, or very rarely, like once a week or so, or if I have to go to like a doctor's appointment and sometimes I go dick around with Micah, like, she wants to go shopping or whatever. But that's kind of our trade-off is like, I'll be kind of the provider as much as I can be, right? And do the best I can do in that regard. And like, I just need you to kind of go get things. And I think we're kind of cool with that, So it's a give and take. I think it's unusual. Here's another wrinkle is that my mom's dad, so my grandfather on my mom's side, also didn't drive. And so maybe it's in the blood. I don't know, but I wonder sometimes, I think it's clear because I had no problem driving a scooter that it's not really about self-preservation. I don't like the idea of me fucking something up. You could hurt someone obviously, but it's more of like being like, I just ran into a fucking tree or something, or like,
right.
It's just a lot of power. And the thing I try to remind myself is like, dude, the lowest common denominator fucking retards in society drive cars. You'll be just fine. Yeah. Like just people, like think about the people And
it's funny because my daughter is in driver's ed right now. Like that's the age that she's at, which is an eye opener for me as it stands.
That's intense.
One of the things that I had said to her when she was worried about doing some of these drives, going on the highway, these various things, was that you have to remember that society is structured around people that are maybe not so competent at doing things surviving. So you're going to be okay at this. And that was part of the speech that I gave. So I understand that.
Yeah,
a little bit different language than you, but definitely the same kind of idea.
Yeah, it's like I do think about that more as I get older. I'm like, dude, like so many people and have met so many people, and like everyone drives, and it's not a competency issue. There's something about, and I tell Micah that she's never seen me drive, I don't think, but it's like I can drive. Like occasionally it's like you gotta like. It hasn't happened in years, but it's like, you need to do this. And it's like, all right, I guess it's like, that's what's necessary, but I just don't want to do it. And I happen to live in like the perfect era where we're like right around the corner from driverless cars and all these kinds of things. I've just like lived on the forefront of like being like, I'm good,
Yeah.
And post-COVID has changed things. I don't know about all of you, but I certainly have fewer clients that even want to see me in person in various aspects of what I do. So,
yeah. You talk about other people being on the road, and my mom works in physical therapy, and she's always been like very anti-motorcycle. And I have a scooter, a pretty powerful scooter, but it needs work. I bought it for a really good deal, and then I messed it up, and so I need to get the whole thing. But anyway, she's like, I see people, multiple times a week that had an accident on a scooter or a motorcycle. And, maybe some of them are stretching the truth a little bit, but like, honestly, I don't think it was most of their fault. Most of the time it was somebody else hit them because they weren't paying attention.
That's usually what it is.
Motorcycles. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
my sister-in-law is a nurse, and she dealt a lot of that kind of stuff. And she's like, yeah, you and your brother, who's her husband, you're never going to get motorcycles. Just don't do it. And I was like, I don't really want that here. Cause yes, there are a lot of people who are driving on the road who have no business driving on the road.
Yeah.
Zero.
And
it's so easy to be distracted.
It's a lot of,
it is scary.
A lot of like, I always think about my old friend Jared Petty at IGN, who was driving across the Bay Bridge from San Francisco to Oakland and got hit head on by a drunk driver. And he was pretty fucked up, but his wife got really fucked up. This was back in, I don't know, 15 or 16.
I remember this. Yeah.
And
I remember hearing about this.
yeah, it was horrible. And it's like, damn, dude, that's crazy. It's like, it's just, no one, that's like, we talk about guns and all these things and I get it, but damn, this is like a weapon that everyone deploys every day. And I don't feel like we treat it with it's like old people driving. Every once in a while I see it's almost inevitable when I'm with Micah and someone does. Micah's a really good driver. In fact, I know she's a good driver because I've always observed that, but my dad complimented her on her driving. My dad's really serious about that shit. And my dad doesn't compliment anyone about anything really. So it's like, I was like, wow, you really are a good driver. So people make these mistakes and you often look and who it is. And it's often an old person.
Yeah.
And it's like, maybe
I was really happy when my grandma got older, like when she gave me the car, she was like, she held on to it for probably 6 months or a year, just because like, you know, there's that letting go of something that she needed to deal with, but nobody had to tell her you need to stop driving. She just knew. She was like, I don't think I should drive anymore. I'm not as aware as I used to be. And like none of us had noticed a problem or anything. It was just like she knew. She was like, I don't want to drive.
And think about the boats that we were forcing these fucking old women to drive in like the 70s and 80s. Like I think about my grandma's old Buick. I'm like, this thing is so big. Like imagine how much better off they would have been in like a little Fit or you know, something, and how much easier it might have been for them as opposed to just driving these 6 miles a gallon fucking station wagons that seat 12.
Those cars were they held up better in wrecks, but also they didn't have seatbelts, so it didn't really matter.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
Pre-power steering is a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't think I've maybe the Ranger didn't have power steering, but I'm pretty sure it did. I don't think I've ever even driven something that didn't have like the modern amenities of making it easier, as opposed to really feeling like you're using a machine. Like I never drove one of my dad's cars, for instance, or anything like that he has had.
Right.
And but you know what? The one thing I did notice too, and we've noticed this even, and this is so obvious, but I'm so stupid, and I also just don't drive cars, is just as a passenger, just as like an observer and an experiencer, right, of cars. Is I'm not in them very much as an adult. Grew up in city, you know, or lived in cities since college. But you know, you take your Ubers and all these kinds of things. You don't really think twice about it. But then I drive in with Micah in her Honda Fit, and it's nice. It's a nice ride, but it's a very budget car. You know, like it's just a lower end car. And just the step up to a Subaru Impreza, which is just one step up. It's not like it's a nice car. It's not like the nicest thing in the world. It's awesome. We're really happy with it. Mm-hmm. You can like just notice the difference in like the way it rides. And then when I get into, I don't know what Mercedes he drives, but my dad drives like this nice, it's just weird even seeing him in this car, but I'm like, he can't, we went to dinner like, you know, a while ago and I drove it and I'm like, this thing is like a cloud. Like you really do get what you pay for. It's not just an aesthetic thing, in other words. And I know that all of you understand that out there, but it was like something that washed over me more recently where I'm like, wow, they're really, it's not just about like the quality of the car and the craftsmanship or whatever. It's really about the experience of driving the car. It's like you're not even in anything that's moving. And then you get back into like a cheaper car and you're like, wow, it's pretty cool, you know? So I really appreciate the whole engineering and like technological aspect of it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. A lot of that has to do with maintenance too. Like I just got some work done on my car. Like I got new brakes on some of the stuff and man, my car just feels so much better right now. Just like, damn, totally worth it. So, and I'm sure your dad, you know, keeps up on all that stuff. So his cars probably all feel really nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cool. It's cool. It's a cool world. I mean, they're a necessity. And I love all of the revolutions that are going on with it, with driverless cars and electric cars and cars with alternative fuel sources. And like, there's a car when I grew up, it would drive around. You'd see it like that ran on like vegetable oil or something like that. Have you ever heard of this kind of stuff where it was like,
Yeah, I think it was like a thing in the 70s, I remember.
Yeah, and like there would be like a bumper sticker and like information about it. I remember that really well. That might have been in like the late 80s, early 90s when I was like really young. So yeah, it's cool. It's interesting to. Did you guys ever see the documentary Who Killed the Electric Car? I love it. Was probably 15 years old now, maybe a little older. That's
about that. Yeah,
that's really good. A good documentary about how all of the stuff that's happening with Tesla now and the other like could have happened many years ago, and and how arbitrary it all was and how they would buy companies and kill them, and interesting shit. So it's cool to, but I also feel like the electric car is kind of a conundrum, just in the sense like, okay, you have your electric car just in any town USA, you plug it in and it's being powered by a coal power plant. It's like, so what is the difference?
Yeah.
There's a difference,
Yeah, can't you like not recycle the batteries or something in there too?
I'm sure
There's,
that's
something
true.
with
I think that's a problem with pretty much any battery at this point. And,
yeah, I guess so.
So it's cool. It's a great idea. I don't want to like burn more fossil fuels for the sake of it.
No.
But it just is interesting. Like I wish we had nuclear power and wind, solar, whatever, hydro, and then you plug it in and then you're really getting free energy.
Right. Yeah, because people don't realize to charge those batteries, we're still burning fossil fuels for the electric.
Right, exactly. Unless you live in a place like I have solar panels, so that would be like kind of, I guess, virtuous in some sense. Or if you live in a place that has hydroelectric or whatever, but a lot of places don't. It's just funny. Like I think a lot of people think they're doing a good thing, and then it's like it's really just 6 of 1.
Yeah.
I love electric cars, but I don't love them for the environmental impact because I think they probably don't have much of one.
It's negligible, I would imagine.
Yeah. I'm sure it's somewhat helpful, but not what they want you to think.
I wonder how much like charging one of your house costs or whatever, how much that would rack up to in terms of like comparing it to gas or something.
It is.
I'm looking it up now.
This is my understanding from somebody who has one. It is slightly cheaper, but it's not like than going to fill up at the
the pump
charger.
Or whatever. Yeah.
It's slightly cheaper, but that also depends on your location and how much your power contract is and all that.
Yeah.
It says $36 to $53 per month in electricity at home on average.
Oh, okay. That's not bad. Because there's like a lot of charging stations around me too that people are always just parked at.
Do you pay for those or are those just free? Like
I don't know.
Encourage people
I've never used one.
So I gotta believe the infrastructure in Southern California is better than other places.
Yeah.
Right.
You do pay for
so. So
you do pay for them unless you buy like a I think, and I might be talking about my ass here, but I think that certain packages, like if you buy one from, if you buy something new from, I'm just making it up, Tesla, I think there might be packages you can get that like include a subsidy for your charging. That or I just misunderstood what I read one time, but by and large you pay for it. But like with Tesla, and I imagine other cars, it just bills it right to your car. Like, because it's all of your information's just in there. So it's not like you're paying at the pump. You plug it in, it knows your car, and you just pay for it digitally.
It's cool, man. Like I'm so happy that I got solar panels because it really does feel kind of cool and good. It's just like, I'm just free electricity. It's not free. I paid a lot of money for the power. I'm still way in the red on the panels, but they'll pay off if like things keep up. I'll pay them off in like, a lot of people rent them or lease them over many years, but people say that's kind of and that's what they want you to do. It's very similar to when we bought the car and I paid for it, and they were like, I asked them honestly, like, you prefer I would like take a loan out, right? And they're like, they were like, yeah, straight up,
Yeah, of course.
And that's why it was funny when I was talking. I'm distracting myself, but when I was talking to my dad about this, trying to learn about the cars and like learn about like what do I do? Like I was very nervous because I'm like, you haggle and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, actually, the age of haggling is basically dead because the age of like cash buying and all of that's dead. Like they have no real incentive because of stock problems and all of this to work with you at all. Like, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like we did get this nipped off and we got a little bit more money for our car and all this kind of stuff. But I didn't feel like I was really like getting a good, like the best deal in the world. But my dad's like, you don't really do that kind of thing anymore anyway. Which was kind of interesting. But I distracted myself on something else I was saying. I don't really remember what exactly it was about.
Well, just
solar panels.
The solar panels. Right. Like, so most people lease their solar panels. And then I learned this too when we were in the process of getting them. We literally, our neighbor got them. And then we're friendly with him and like behind us. And he recommended them to us. And then I realized he got like probably, a $500 credit or something for doing that, which is totally fine. I don't care. But then they came over and talked to us and they were really pushing us towards like, you can actually lease them for 30 years, like, and kind of spread that payment out and it becomes somewhat negligible. But then you read about how some people get caught in this trap where they're actually paying more for their electricity than they otherwise were in order to pay these panels off. Like the deal is not as good as it seems. And I didn't want to be trapped in that. So I was like, I'm just going to buy them up front. And then they had to like go and like it was a much lower cost actually for me to do that like over the time, which was cool. But I'm glad I did that because I think it'll pay itself off in like 8 years or so. And then it really truly will be free and clear power, which is cool. And I wonder if maybe electric cars is kind of like they're like a red herring for like maybe we should be focusing on getting people's houses set up and the permanent infrastructure set up to get us off of these more harmful fuel sources instead of like worrying about cars and all this kind of stuff, which is kind of nipping at the edges. But like a plane will like rip through like more fuel than you'll use in your entire fucking life, you know?
Right.
And that's kind of crazy. I saw there was a picture going around recently on Twitter of a person. I saw it. I don't know who it was said it, but it's like, this is a whatever, how many tens of thousands gallon tank. And this is how much, and it was like just a picture of it. Like, this is how much is on a plane. And I was like, damn, dude, that's like, where's it all coming from?
Yeah.
How are we not at peak oil? They say we're nowhere near peak oil.
That's crazy.
It doesn't make any, like, where is it? Where is it, Hoeg?
No.
Well, I mean, we could talk about fracking or various things, but in basics, when humanity needs more of a resource, science and manufacturing tends to come up with a way to go get that resource that used to be too expensive to go get.
Yeah, they do like sideways drilling now and shit like that and all this kind of crazy stuff. And yeah, fracking, like you said.
All that kind of stuff. But I have to say, when you said that you asked them whether they'd prefer you to lease it or buy it, I really enjoyed the notion that your main negotiation strategy is to go ask the person what they would prefer and do the opposite.
Well, this was after like we already dealt with them or whatever, and because they had to like fill out all this paperwork because we were and I'm like, oh, like is this part of it? Like, yeah, because as part of the conversation, they were like, yeah, we part of the reason we prefer it is because we have to fill out all this fucking nonsense.
Hey, no, I think it's a perfectly reasonable rubric to use in negotiations. Like, if folks want to say, hey, will you tell me what you would like me to do here? And they're open enough with you to give you that information. I think that's a perfectly functional way to negotiate without having to get deep into the weeds.
Yeah, well, I must admit it was post negotiation because it never even came up. I don't think how we were going to pay for it until they took my credit score or something like that. Like after we were kind of like, yeah, this is what we want. We're the easiest customers too. It's like I've joked about.
Well, I agree with your dad, honestly, on car purchases, which is to say, even as a professional negotiator, right? I'm a corporate contract lawyer. For the most part, buying a car now is bringing in a couple comps. And then when they tell you they can't do that, saying, well, then I don't need to buy a car. And they can move around the edges on those kinds of things usually.
Sure.
But yeah, it's not, you're not walking in and giving 6 different prices and having a whole like scene from a sitcom in the 60s to buy a car. At least that hasn't been my experience.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was kind of expecting was like, oh, like you can get got here. You got to be on the fucking lookout, you know? And instead we extracted some goods. They also really wanted Micah's car and we were going to sell it anyway. So that was like part of it too, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's useful to get comps. I would say that about anything that you're looking to buy.
Yeah.
But other than that, no.
Most people now, like used to, you went to the car dealership to find the car you wanted to buy. And now I think, I mean, this is what my friend who works in the industry said, is that most people come to you because you have the car they want. So people are already they're researching ahead of time and knowing what they want. They know about what it should go for. And the dealer that I bought my car from was like, they have really great prices. You know, their prices are at or under MSRP typically. But they're like, we don't do any negotiations at all. Like whatever the price says is what you pay, unless there's something that we detect that's wrong with the car or whatever. They mostly do new cars, but he was like, we set our prices the lowest we can, and then that's what you pay. And like I was looking around at other places. Yeah, it's great because then the people who are worried about getting ripped off know that like they're not getting ripped off, or if they are getting ripped off, at least they're not having to negotiate.
Yeah, systematically getting ripped off is okay.
Right.
Yeah, like if you know, and if you don't, you don't. That always seemed kind of fucking weird to me. I'll never forget, dude. I'll never forget when I went and bought a mattress in San Francisco in like 2009 or 2008 with like a long ago ex, and and I was like, they're like, this is what the bed costs or whatever. I'm like, okay, and then she's like, wait a minute, can we get this, and like this off? And then she like fucking cut them down by like $200 or something. I'm like, well, what? They were about to sell me this thing for $200 more and like not even tell me that it didn't have to be that expensive. Like, why do we even play this game? It's so fucking shitty.
Mattresses and jewelry are two of the most high markup, like not needs, but goods really.
It's interesting.
You're talking about the loan thing. My previous car had gotten totaled, so I had, the insurance money to work with. And I went in and I was prepared to put X amount down. And they were like, well, here's the I can't remember what it was, but here's the interest rate we can give you if you put that much down. If you're willing to save like $3,000 and take $3,000 out more in a loan, we can give you 1% off of your interest. And I was like, oh, and when can I pay that off? They were like, tomorrow. So I literally got an extra % knocked off, took an extra $3,000 loan out from the dealership, and then paid that $3,000 off literally the next day. And like over time, that extra % was hundreds of dollars. I don't know.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that, because they asked us. There was something that came up like that. They understand that. I think Micah might even ask, like, what stops us from paying the loan off?
Right. Yeah.
If we went with that APR or whatever, and they're like, really nothing. Right. We just would prefer that you didn't do that to us, or whatever. And I was like, yeah, I'm like that. I'm not gonna. I'm very lucky, certainly, but I don't want debt. Like, I just don't. I want to live as cheap as possible, because I'm so paranoid that the bottom's going to fall out all the time, that I want to just not. And that's always been my posture in my entire fucking adult life, and my working life is always just like, prepare for the worst. You're going to get laid off, and that was like my entire life until I started this company. And now my entire life is like, it's all going to fucking fall apart. So I'm trying. That was part of the impetus of the solar panels, is ultimately to make things cheaper and like just aggressively paying the house off and all of that.
Right.
Because I just don't want to carry, if I can help it, any sort of debt, so that when inevitably everyone starts to hate me, I can be like, maybe.
Colin, if that hasn't happened, that's not going to.
That's seriously.
But hey, I've said this in the past to encourage people, though, because this wasn't even really spelled out to me fully when I bought my solar panels, is that when you use solar power in the United States, you can sell your credits on an exchange by megawatt hour. My house makes like, I don't know, 7 or 8 megawatt hours a year, which is almost enough to cover my power usage, because our power usage is really high with the pool filter, and then it just drops, and the AC, and then it just drops to like literally a quarter of that in the winter and fall. And so like we build up credits and so on. So it basically pays for itself, but you basically store these things away, and then you join these exchanges, and I'm on one of them. I think it's called the SDEC exchange or something like that. You connect it to your solar panels and put up your credits, and then I guess companies and other things or entities are buying these credits, and you get paid a market rate for them. So it's not a lot of money. I've made like a few $100s in 2 years on it, but it's kind of chipping away at that cost with some chip damage as well. Yeah. So if people are thinking about going solar, I highly recommend it, as long as your house has to be kind of facing in the right direction. My solar panels are actually on the front of my house. I like that aesthetic, but some people hate it. I think it looks very technologically advanced to have that on your house. But you have to have your house facing a certain way. Like my neighbor across,
not in Western Pennsylvania. You can't be in Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah, why is that? Because you don't get.
Well, we don't have.
You don't have sufficient sun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say too. Is you need to be in a good spot for sun. But you even get you'll get like not very much, but a few megawatt hours of power even through like cloud cover. So it's kind of cool. It feels good to feel like you're doing something if you can help. I think that I think that like the man-made global warming stuff is happening, but I also think it's partially overblown as far as what its long-term effects are going to be on us. But I think that like we should do something about it nonetheless. Like I want to affect the planet as little as possible. And I feel bad that like everything's accelerating so badly and things seem so out of control. And maybe the change will just have to happen on an individual basis. And by the way, it's like a fucking grain of sand on the beach. It's like irrelevant, really, what I'm doing. But it makes you feel good about yourself a little bit. So yeah, I highly recommend that because it's cool. That wasn't spelled out to me, so it'll help pay it off a little bit quicker, and then the panels will probably degrade, and I won't get anything out of them. I'll have to get new ones. All right, are we satisfied on this conversation about cars?
Oh wow, we were talking about cars. Yeah, I'm good.
We were.
All right, I wanted to end with this is an interesting one to have Hoeg here for, especially. I wanted to talk about vigilantism and how you guys feel about it. Obviously, I think we all agree that there's like a pretty obvious line in the sand where it would be wrong. Like You don't go and kill people for any reason. You don't, do things like this. But the level of vigilantism I'm talking about and wanted to kind of get in your heads on today was the level of vigilantism I see on like YouTube and Rumble, Kick. It's not really on Twitch, I don't think, where specifically people are going and setting up, and as people know, I love these videos, or like this genre of video. I'm not so sure how I feel about these videos that I'm going to discuss today, of the genre of setting up like child predators and then catching them in the act of trying to meet a child or whatever, or like a teenager. And I was in college when To Catch a Predator came out, and that was like everyone's favorite thing. And people might remember that was like, first it was a segment on Dateline, and you'd catch it once in a while, and it was fucking dope. And then they were smart enough to be like, let's just spin this thing out and do it. And it became like a bit of a phenomenon. And I actually knew someone in college whose rabbi in Maryland was caught on one of the first episodes. He was an older guy. I can see his face. Like, I know. And I was like, wow, it's fucking crazy, dude. So like people like, like this 6 degrees of separation shit with this and all the rest. And it became kind of a genre, and then it went away. Like, I think they had a hard time catching people after a while. People became too aware of the situation. I don't really know. And then with the age of YouTube, I discovered, and really deep into the age of YouTube, I rediscovered these kinds of videos of predator catchers and all the rest. And it brings up this idea of like vigilante justice. It's extrajudicial in some sense. And you're kind of setting someone up, though you understand intuitively that they think it's real, and so they are in the wrong, and they are kind of the sorts of people you want to suss out, right? But there was no danger in this situation because there's no real person involved. But you understand that if there was a real person involved, bad things would have happened. And it's this really fuzzy area. And I think that in the non-violent, more pacifist realm of this kind of content, I'm actually really into it. I think it's not only entertaining, it's funny. It really shouldn't be, but it is funny because a lot of these guys are just fucking dead to rights. It's like they just spill the beans. There's that one guy in Colorado I always talk about who I love, who makes them call their wives, which I think is the fucking funniest thing. Like just the
brutal. Yeah.
Like
brutal.
Because I said this recently, and I thought it was actually somewhat well eloquently put, which was, I was like, the reason that reality TV seems to kind of be in free fall now and like kind of irrelevant is because like we really just have tuned into reality now through social media and YouTube and all these things, like where you don't need cops anymore because now I can watch body cam footage, and I don't need Chris Hansen at the Sting House with 3-minute commercial breaks. I can just watch this random dude do it on YouTube, and he does it even better. And everyone has their kind of touch. But this is what I wanted to specifically ask you is, where is the line? Because what I've noticed, and this is becoming more and more common, is the predator catcher videos are becoming violent. And I don't know if you guys have seen these in any way. And it goes both ways in some sense. There have been no fewer than, I think, 2 of these guys that have been killed in the process of doing these videos, and another one that was recently shot doing it. So it's dangerous on their end too. But there's this whole group of guys now that, and this is like where it gets into like Rumble and Kick and places where they like kind of let things go, and they have much more of a freedom of speech and freedom of expression kind of situation going on, where some of these guys are getting the shit beat out of them when they go and do these things. It's also attracting like random celebrities to do it. Like rappers and stuff are getting involved. Wasn't Akon like singing at one of them recently? Like some guy was getting arrested for it, and he was like singing about it in the background. Like, it's art. It's art. But there is a level of it that I'm uncomfortable with, where it's like, I don't want it to get like this. I want these guys to get sussed out and caught for doing what they're doing, but I don't need them to be punched in the face and like thrown around and beaten and all these kinds of things. And then people kind of celebrate it. And what I'm so surprised about, especially for one of these guys that does it, is like, it's often the same people. And I'm like, I don't even know how you're getting away with this, And what it reminds me of, and it's like, is in what some people think is like an ultimate sense of vigilante justice, which I've always had a problem with. And like, I think I've put it into words in the past, which is like, I have a problem with this idea that like we send people to prison in the United States and we know that people are getting raped. Right. Like, just saying it straight up. And it's a joke. And I've joked about it. And other people have been like, oh, he's going to have a fucking good time in prison. When you say that, you know what you're saying.
Yeah, don't drop the soap.
Right. Like, you're saying, like, some dudes are going to, like, jump this dude and rape him.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, what are you really saying? Like, why would you? And I've had to reflect on that too, being like, why is that like so, like, that's not even common. That's like everyday shit that people say to each other. And I don't think people even really think about it. So I wanted to ask you guys how you feel about these levels of vigilante justice, where you think it fits, where you don't. You know, you can have like really common shit, Hoeg, like jury nullification and shit like that. That's its own form of vigilante justice, right? And then you have this much more violent shit going all the way up to what people happen in prison. It's like if a child molester, a horrible person, right, goes to prison, they're going to get killed the second that they're not protected or put in a protected population or whatever. And it's like, we have to wonder, it's like, is that okay? Or is that like the level of vigilante justice we're okay with? If it is, then why wouldn't we just do it as the state and just execute them if we think the crime is that bad? You know, it's a lot of interesting questions. I want to go to you, Hoeg, first on this. I'm curious what you think about all of this.
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, I am a barred practicing attorney. And as such, I am by technical title an officer of the court. So I'm supposed to tell you about the law and abiding by the law and those kinds of things. What I would say from the perspective of vigilante justice, and I can't say that I have seen these videos, but based on your descriptions of them, and I certainly know of their existence, I would say that in general, vigilantism exists, as I understand it philosophically, when people feel like the system itself isn't doing enough or could do more. And to the extent that they are popular and backed up by viewers and folks that back them up, I think that that's essentially an indication that society's legal protections differ from what people think they should be. And I think that's an important part of the conversation. I'm never going to back up vigilantism, right? Like, that's never going to be what I defend. In fact, I often have an issue with the way it's presented in things like the MCU or other comic books, right? When we talk about pop culture, it's often, well, this has to be fixed and I'm the only person that can do it. And so I'm allowed to axe these people or shoot them with bat things or whatever it might be. And the biggest issue with that from a legal perspective is that what we have done with society, what every society has done in some level, whether or not it's democratic or not, is to say this other organization is going to have a monopoly on force. It's going to have a monopoly on power. We're going to give them permission to use guns and batons and cages in order to meet whatever kind of punitive measures we think are necessary to keep society functioning. And when an individual or even a group of individuals take that on themselves, that's when you get into conversations about mob justice, right? Like, that's when you have to talk about lynchings. That's when you have to talk about things that are perhaps not humanity's best moments, right? And I think it's very easy for any individual person to kind of get their blood up, to get heated about something that is very important to them, and to take steps that we as a society don't think are appropriate. So I do back up the rule of law and think that the process that we use to write those laws and then to have them enforced through the mechanisms of whatever executive branch we're talking about, whether it's the federal or the state or the local, is the appropriate way to kind of tamp down on that bloodlust kind of mentality that we can get into. And so I am always going to sit in that particular chair on this question overall. But when we talk about goofy YouTube videos, to the extent violence isn't involved, I don't have an issue with people doing these things necessarily, but I would point out that this is a very particular case of law writing where, because law enforcement itself was having issues enforcing certain of these things, those particular laws are written so that there doesn't have to be an actual in reality victim, right? That those laws are written so that if the person has the intent and understands there to be a victim, then they are in fact a criminal under the way this is written. And that's unique for things like predator laws, where we otherwise require reality of an issue, right? Because of what you said, Colin, which is to say, we understand that if you as the criminal think these things, then you would have done these bad things if it had been reality. And we don't impose that same kind of breadth on, bank robbers or other things like that. So no, I'm not in favor of Batman being out there. I get worried about YouTubers and folks doing these kinds of things for exactly the reason that you identify, which is to say, I think these things tend to escalate and spin out. And not just on this, right? Like this isn't unique to predator catchers. I think the Logan Pauls of the world have a tendency to get crazy and spin out. You see these things with all sorts of YouTube or other social media content where somebody thinks this is going to be a good video and they crash a plane in the desert and they wind up going to jail from the FAA, right? So, I mean, like this has a tendency to happen where attention is kind of the commodity of the internet. And I worry about people escalating to be the next best thing, right? Because if you aren't excited about laughing at this, if you aren't bemused, then maybe violence comes into it. Maybe you do have rappers singing, whatever it might be, at the end of these videos. And there are bad ways that can go. And so I worry about that particular slope.
Yeah, there is something, it's not a thought crime what they're committing. Like they're trying to commit a crime. It is something that like they're using, the people that I guess set them up in quotes are using what it means to be doing that specific crime against them in some way, which is, I think, part of the righteousness of it, in my opinion. It's like, why are you doing this? Yeah, there's no victim, there's no crime, but it's like, why are you doing this? You know, and that's But
I don't think there's a lot of dispute on that, right? Like that's what makes this particular genre popular and pretty easy to metabolize for folks, right? There are other areas where you might have a concern that somebody's being entrapped or that there's a gray area involved in this whole process. And in this particular way that these are done, where in the Chris Hansen universe, it's an FBI agent is pretending to be a 15-year-old girl or whatever, and you get that as part of the documentary, that you know that bad things would have happened had that been the reality of the situation. And so people can feel comfortable that there aren't folks getting accidentally brought in and crippled by these things. But I don't know about you, but YouTubers, social media influencers in general, they don't always completely follow by the rules, and they don't always share with you exactly what's happening in their edit of the video that they're making. So I also worry about the kind of bad information version of all this kind of stuff when people just follow these things for their sole understanding of what's happening in the world, right? And I have a show that I call Headlines, which is what I actually made a video of this week, where we talk about media coverage of things, which has at least ostensibly some safety measures as to how they write headlines and how they report on things. YouTubers, Twitch makers, Kick, Rumble, wherever you find yourself, they have their own ethics, as I do when I make my videos, but it's not quite the same. So I do worry about not getting a complete information or understanding of the situation, or them potentially not doing what they said they were doing in their narration on a video.
Right. Yeah, that's vital. Like the documentation and all that. Like it is true that you make assumptions that the way they're framing this stuff is true, but to be fair, they usually get them to confess right on the videos to all the things and more. And there's a lot of fuzziness about like people thinking they're being approached by cops and how obvious it is that they're not, and all. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff to say. Ben, where are you on this? Where do you are you familiar with this content? This sort of content? How do you feel about vigilantism generally speaking? I mean, I guess I'm just not crazy about it getting violent. It was funny at first until I realized that it's like becoming its own subgenre, basically.
Yeah. As far as vigilante justice, I think it's wrong. I don't really like that it has a real or perceived need, even though, there's definitely a case to be made that there is. Vigilante justice in general, I don't really trust the government to do what's right for us as a rule, but also I'm not really sure that, and that comes, by the way, from a former elected official. Okay. I've seen some stuff and I felt that way before, and I feel that way even more after. But anyway, with that said, like, vigilante justice against people who harm children, I would just prefer to pretend like I didn't know it happened, but feel like I'm really happy that it did. At the same time, like, you mess with kids, I'm not into that at all. Not even in a give them grace kind of way. It's disgusting to me in any way, shape, or form. As far as the content, the YouTube content and everything else, I find it entertaining. I really do, even if I don't always think that it's necessarily ethical or moral to do it. I worry about entrapment a little bit. The thing that I most worry about is the same thing. Well, there's two things. One, I do worry about the violent nature of it, because it's going to get to a point where more and more people are getting hurt, and whether that be the people who are doing the vigilante documentation, or whether that's the people who are the accused who didn't get their time in court. Which, again, I don't always believe that a time in court equals justice, but that's the way our system's set up, and we should have some respect for it. The other thing I worry about, though, is so I worry about that escalating further and further to the point that it starts getting faked, which I think there have already been some of those where like people are faking these videos to some extent. I don't know who would sign up to be the volunteer of the accused, but I know that some of it's a little bit staged. Not by and large. I just know that there have been instances of it. The thing I actually worry about is the criminals not getting caught because they're catching on to what these predator catcher people are doing, and then thereby altering their ways. Now, you could make the case, and by that they don't get caught. You could make the case that, well, if these people aren't doing it, no one would be doing it, and that sometimes is the case where they're just not on the radar of anybody else. But I don't know, when you have enough of these types of videos out there, and you see the way that they go about catching these people, if I'm a sick pervert, I'm going to be like, oh, okay, that's how they're doing it. I'm going to not fall into that trap. And I feel like it makes it easier to some extent for them to avoid getting caught. So that's one of the things I worry about, is that it becomes too easy. Now, as far as just the very human element, I'm all about catching these guys and embarrassing the hell out of them. You know, I don't think we do a good job as the United States justice system in punishing child offenders harshly enough. I don't know what the right answer is. I just know that it's a big problem, clearly, and we need to do something better about it. But I don't know how to do that. And I understand. I really do understand these people wanting to take it into their own hands and do something about themselves. You get into the edge where it becomes more about, are you doing this because you know it gets clicks and makes you money? Are you doing this because it's the right thing to do? I don't think the two are mutually exclusive by any means, but I don't know. I have a lot of problems with it, but by and large, like, my heart says, yeah, get him, embarrass him, throw him in jail, whatever happens. My head says this probably isn't a great idea.
Well, and I think that's the important kind of distinction, Ben, which is to say, I think for the most part, all reasonable people can say, yep, child predators, we don't want good things for them. And as Colin said in his intro, that doesn't mean we're sentencing them to execution or rape, but we don't want good things to happen to them. Where I worry about the slide is not just with the escalation of the YouTube stuff, but also the slide in rhetoric, right? Okay, so those are the lowest of the low. We can all agree that they should be caught. Maybe society and the justice system isn't doing enough to catch them. But what about people feeling emboldened to vigilante justice on different topics, right? And then this ultimately lends itself to like the very top line, like politics, right? This is the people on Twitter telling folks they want to punch a Nazi, right? And who defines that? And where does that stop? And if that's violence in the streets, that's probably not the society we want in any event. So like that's where I come down on vigilante justice. I'm not saying that the government is perfect at the justice system. I would never, ever deign to say that. But that there is value in taking this notion of justice that's very easy to get out of people's hands and out of control and putting it into the maybe not as efficient cold bureaucracy of something like a justice system.
Right. The thing that's really hard for me when it comes to child offenders and reforming them, sending them to prison, whatever our legal system decides, is that I have known many law enforcement individuals, both inside and outside of my time in politics, and unanimously they all say, like, child offenders are repeat offenders. They don't reform the same way. There's something broken in their brain, right? Like, we would agree with that as a society since it's wrong. there's something broken in their brain, and by and large, they don't reform. They're always going to have the same. So, like, I'm not saying maybe someone would never do it again, that they wouldn't do it again, whatever. Maybe someone would, but they're still going to have that inclination, and that's really hard for me to deal with. As a parent, as someone who loves kids, like, not like Michael Scott, little kid lover, whatever he tried to make his username, but it's really hard for me to deal with. Like, oh, you're going to send this guy to prison for 5 years, and he's going to come out and still want to touch little kids. I don't really know how to deal with that, like on a very base brain level, like knowing that those people are still out there. Now, I'm not saying there's people all the time who want to do reprehensible things and never act on them, but I'm saying these people who act on them, like, studies and anecdotal evidence, which I know anecdotal is anecdotal, but show that, like, most of the time these people are just going to do it again. And that really makes it hard for me to say, oh yeah, let's just give them a trial.
Well, and I'm going to say then, in response to that, then the correct move is convincing policymakers that the time needs to be longer, or there needs to be more mental health aspects of that prison stint or whatever it might be, rather than taking it into your own hands individually. But again, I'm the comments in my channel will call me the corporate or system bootlicker. So right. I'm just telling you that's the way I think it would work best. And I understand folks that say exactly what you said, which is that it's not working right now, or it's not meeting whatever needs I think that justice would demand of this particular situation. And I think that's when vigilantism comes up. Right. I think lawmakers and law enforcement should take into account that these things exist and say, I don't think we're meeting some important societal belief on the justice system and justice and how it's being meted out. But I think that there are issues with people that look at prison sentences on all sorts of things and not just child predation or sex-related crimes and say, okay, this person robbed a bank 20 years ago, he got out, and there's an issue in 2024 with folks understanding the notion of he served his time, right? Like that on the internet, on social media, you bring this back up and say he should never have a job again. He should never be able to have a livelihood or live peacefully again. And at some point, we have to get back to the notion that you can actually fulfill your debt to society and be okay with it. And I think that there is a little bit of a movement on social media and other places that I've seen to essentially never allow that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's good and bad that nothing ever goes away, because there are plenty of people, who are reformed felons who maybe never break the law again in their life, and they go on to lead amazing lives and start new businesses and whatever. And the system does work. It does reform them. I guess I'm just too jaded on the system at this point. Now, that doesn't mean I'm like, I want this to continue happening. I want these predator catchers, these vigilantes to keep going. I still think by and large it's a net negative. But it does make me more apt to turn a blind eye, I guess you could say.
Brad, where are you on this topic?
I don't know, man. You guys all brought like really good points. It's some of mine I'm going to bring up again. I'm kind of mixed on it. Like, I think sometimes I think the justice system isn't perfect and doesn't always work out. Like, I remember during COVID here in California, and like people getting thrown into jail, then immediately just released, like with no bail or bail, no fee or everything. Like, people just back out on the streets doing the same shit, getting arrested multiple times, and just nothing really helping or happening to them. And I was like, well, I wish they would get a steeper punishment. But at the same time, like Hoeg brought up, is I do worry about people taking it too far and being emboldened by some other actions and bringing it to other parts of life. Like, he brought up politics and stuff like that. Like, I'm trying to imagine like calling some nutcase out there thinks you're racist and transphobic or whatever, and they think they're justified into, stalking you, threatening you, harming you with actual violence. I worry about stuff getting to that point, especially now in our political landscape, Palestine versus Israel and stuff like that. Someone getting like assaulted because they're Jewish and people think that's okay, or someone getting assaulted because they support Palestine. That's the kind of stuff I worry about happening more and more as this kind of stuff happens. Like, child predators, man, like, they can go fuck themselves. Like, I don't give a shit if they get beat up. But at the same time, I do worry about like some of these people getting their ass beat on video, if that somehow fucks up like them getting arrested in some way.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure how it'd be, but I would be very upset if this guy got off the hook because he got beat up on camera instead of being in jail for years. That's the kind of shit I worry about. I'm not a law expert. That's Hoeg would know way more about that stuff. That's the kind of stuff I worry about, and just my ignorance on some of those laws. So I don't know, man. Like, you want to see people who do bad things get punished for it, and it sucks when someone who does something bad gets away with it. But at the same time, it's hard to say. You know, like if you see, like, let's say, for example, you see someone, like, God forbid, like molesting a child in public or whatever, and they get their ass beat like right away. I think everyone would be okay with that. But I just worry about some other stuff, how slippery some things may get, like free speech demonstrations going on and stuff like that, people getting their asses beat. That's what I really worry about. So I don't know. It's a double-edged sword. There's some good in it, but there's also some bad in it. So I don't think there is a perfect solution. It's a case-by-case basis.
It's funny because I agree with a lot of what you're saying, and Hoeg had brought up something earlier too, which in passing, which I think is actually really powerful, which is like the whole punch a Nazi thing. And I remember when that was like going around.
Yeah.
I took a lot of heat from it. It was in my previous job, actually. It was so long ago, but where I was like, you want to do this because like the parameters are going to just you actually want to respect that the Nazi could say what he wants under the same freedom of speech that protects your ability to say what you want. And there's something righteous about that. And if you try to narrow the lines in further, then you have to understand they're going to be constantly reassessed. And this is why I think it's not that like we agree with the Nazi. We think the Nazi's a terrible person, but it's about like, how much do you believe what you believe, you know? And so with the vigilante justice and like harming people and kind of taking justice in your own hands and matters in your own hands, the one thing that I guess bothers me about it more than anything is like, if we really feel this way about people, then why don't we just admit it? And then like, why, and this is what Hoeg was saying, like, why not legislate around it? If you believe that like someone who hurts a child, like loses their right to the same system of justice that everyone else does, gets access to, then maybe we should codify it, you know? But I think that when you like say things like that to people, they understand that that's not really the way we're supposed to do things. And so, you know, that goes back to what I was saying about prison and just this idea that people get fucked up in prison. I've said many, many times that like watching Oz on HBO was the most fucking horrifying thing I'd ever witnessed in my entire life when I was younger. And it's obviously not real, but I think some of it is very real in a lot of different ways. And it just goes to show you how there's this parallel world where, listen, if you think the violent sex offender should be shanked and killed in prison, then why not just execute him? You know, now you can make many cases why you shouldn't be executing anyone. I'm not saying that this is the level that you should be getting execution. What I'm saying is like, why are we shirking our responsibility to justice to prisoners or to YouTubers or whatever? Like, let's fucking stand behind it with our whole chest if this is the way we really feel about it. Otherwise, why allow it to happen at all? So I actually think in some sense a line is being crossed with these more recent predator catcher videos. And I know the one dude who does it, I think is DAP or whatever, Dads Against Predators or whatever. It's like a righteous thing, but I have no doubt that guy's going to get fucking killed at some point if he keeps doing what he's doing. Like, because it's horrible that these acts of violence against the people that are doing it happen. The people rather that are like, you know, assailing them, let's say, with video cameras and microphones and all that kind of stuff. But when you, on the other hand, you have to understand like the level of danger you're in when you are ruining someone's life, like whether they deserve it or not. You're doing it dead to rights in front of all these cameras, often live streaming with lights on them. People are going to get fucking nuts. I'm surprised by how docile many people are in that situation and how talkative they become. Every once in a while, you see someone freak out. The PlayStation guy, that's the thing that got me into this stuff, like in a major way, was that when that guy at PlayStation got caught in one of these videos, his video is the worst one that I've ever seen because he just went back into his apartment and never came out. some of these guys stay on for hours. You know, it's like, what the fuck? And so you have to just, is it a righteous thing morally? Yeah, kind of. But you have to take that into account. You're putting yourself and others into danger. And I don't know. It's just something I wanted to discuss because a lot of people have been bringing this up recently about this escalation in the predator catcher war, you know?
Well, and I would say it's the most dangerous in terms of vigilantism and what I've talked about when you do feel self-righteous, right? Yeah. It's easier to escalate and get into bad positions when you feel like you're doing the right thing. And so I think that's why it's happening on these margins that we're talking about with child predation, but also why it's worthy of conversation and concern.
Yeah, well said. I won't linger on the topic any longer than that. I just, I'll be interested to see what people have to say about this and what they think about this content and kind of the turn that it's taken, because it's noticeable. Someone who consumes a lot of it. Now, I like my fight videos and all that kind of stuff, but that's like live action shit.
Right.
You know, that's not justice. It's just like,
there's not a lot of morality there.
No, it's a duel. Yeah. You know, basically. And I love that shit. I love it.
Duel.
I love it. But that's nothing to do with like the justice system and cops and laws and stuff. That's two people or groups of people, whatever, doing what they want to do. And I'm going to watch it and I'm going to enjoy it. You know, this is a little bit different.
The freak out video.
There's I don't like though. So I think it's on fight video, like the fight video Reddit what is it even called? Fight porn. And they have like little tags that they put underneath things. And one of them is brain damage. And I don't watch those because those are usually the ones where it's like someone definitely got fucking destroyed. And it's usually it's not like snuff videos or mega violent death videos. You have to go to like Live Leak for that sort of stuff. But stuff where you're like, yikes. You know, if you want, I mean, you could see anything you want on like Live Leak style sites. I mean, that's easy enough. But that's not the kind of stuff I'm into. I've seen crazy shit. I've said before, like you watch like an ISIS execution video or something. I've seen that kind of stuff, but it's like, I personally am not seeking that level of violence out. It's good to watch. I personally believe that I watched Daniel Pearl's beheading back in the day, the Wall Street Journal guy that got caught like early in the Iraq war. And I actually think seeing that kind of stuff is somewhat vital to remind you how real it is. Like it's not like moving pieces around a risk board or something. Like this is real shit.
Mm-hmm. Well, Colin, to that point, when Saddam Hussein was executed,
that was on video too.
When they hung him, I was a kid. When was that? I don't know, but I was
like
young,
2005 or something like that.
Yeah. So I was late in high school, I guess, and I was like, I got to watch that. So
I watched it.
I spent the 47 hours it took me on my dial-up internet to download the video from wherever I found it.
One frame at a time.
Yeah, exactly. and watched it. And I remember being like pumped up, like, I'm so happy he's about to die. And I watched it and I was like, felt sick. Yeah. I was just like, I can't believe I just watched that. And I think that was vital for me because like,
definitely, I'm
not going to say that my political persuasions or anything changed dramatically, but I do know that was the moment where I was like, oh, like there's actual shit happening. And even to the point where like when the assassination attempt happened a month ago or whatever, however long it was now, and somebody had a picture of the shooter on the roof dead, and I saw it, just like came across my Twitter feed because that's what Twitter's good for now, is shock and awe. And I was like, I saw it and it took me back for a second, and I looked at it, and then my wife was like, oh, can I see it? I was like, yes, but do you want? I want to ask you, like, just to double check that wasn't a gut thing. Like, do you actually want to? She's like, I don't know. I was like, yeah, and I told her, I was like, here's my primary example. Like when I was very excited to see Saddam Hussein die, and then I was like very not happy that I saw it afterwards. She was like, and ultimately she decided, she's like, I do want to look at it, but it was like, I wanted to have that. Are you sure you want to see a dead body right now? Like that kind of thing. It's very jarring.
Well, and you do understand why the news does those kind of things, but I'm in agreement that there is value to actually seeing how things are. I'm not going to talk about death videos or Saddam Hussein, but I think this comes up most often when I'm reading news or otherwise becoming acquainted with what's happening. When media outlets or whoever's reporting on something don't share what the offensive statement was in the news item that they're bringing, right? This person was fired for making this statement or doing this thing, and we're not going to tell you what it is throughout the entire 15 paragraphs, because I do think it's important to know what exactly is beyond the pale in various aspects of our lives. And the fact that you're unwilling to even share it with me is neither helpful to me, nor is it informative for what it is we're talking about, because we should have that conversation. Was this a justified kind of thing or not? And I see that a lot in media, where they do this kind of kindness exercise, paternalism, keeping the bad things from your eyeballs. But sometimes it's worse for understanding what's happening in the world.
Yeah. And it's funny, man, the Saddam video was interesting to me, not because of watching him die. That's one thing. But what I really remember from that video, and I remember that video because it was crazy, was the jubilation.
Yeah.
That's like what I always took away from it. I was like, wow, dude, this is crazy. Like, these people are going to string this dude up and fucking kill him right now, And yeah, that was a big takeaway for me. And I think that was a path of my own. People make fun of it. It's like Colin likes fight videos and all these things, and he calls himself a pacifist. It's like, I am a pacifist. I'm not violent at all. It doesn't mean I don't want to watch other things.
I'm not in the fight videos,
and I don't want and when I say pacifism, I mean state violence. I don't want violence of any kind, obviously, but I certainly don't want state violence. And I think things like that, and just seeing the brutality. And I'm right in the age bracket of people that I was a senior in high school when 9/11 happened. So a lot of my friends did go into the military and are all fucked up, and saw and did a lot of things. And it's like, it's just kind of shocking how fucked up everything is out there, and how violent everything is. And I think you need stark reminders of that sometimes. And maybe this is another one of those random stark reminders, very similar to Punch a Nazi, where it's like, you better be careful with where this takes you, So anyway, I appreciate you guys listening to me and dealing with my own topic here, the fourth and final one of this week's episode of Constellation, Last Day Media's conversational podcast. Let's go around the horn and say goodbye to everyone. Brad Ellis, goodbye to you. Have a good weekend. Be well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Fun chatting with you boys. Good to see you, Hoeg. It's been a little while. It's a pleasure to chat with you again.
Yeah.
And
see you soon.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll be on. Well, we'll be on shows again soon enough. I'm not sure when I'm on Summon Sign again, but it'll be in the coming weeks, I'm sure. Rick Hoeg, goodbye to you. Be well. Hope you are well. Everything's good in your world, and talk to you soon.
Yes. 2024 has been an interesting year. And it will undoubtedly continue to be an interesting year as we head into the end of the political season. But I'm very happy to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no problem, man. We'll see you again soon. And Ben Smith, be well. Have a good weekend. Thanks for coming by.
Yep. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And I'm probably not going to play more Skull and Bones tonight. We'll see. We'll see how.
Well, if you do, you can hit me up. We can pirate the Indian Ocean together.
Sounds good.
Cool. Yeah, my nephew Declan, my dad is got some sort of dinner going for him tonight at a restaurant here in Richmond, or in the Richmond area. So we're going to go to that. And then I think my neighbor's kid got into Virginia Tech, and they packed their car and I think left either last night or this morning. So I'm like, it must be imminent. He must be going. So this might be his last night here even. I don't even know. So
it's right about now for most of the universities.
Yeah. It was about time for me too, when I went away many years ago. So yeah, I'm got to go to that tonight. And then, I've had a lot of guests here. Like Ramon was here for 5 days. Before that, Mike's parents were here for a couple of days, and so on and so forth. So I just need to kind of be off the grid for a little while. All right, my friends. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you.
All right.
Be well. Thank you again. Thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of Last Day Media. Patreon.com/lastdaymedia for early ad-free access, etc. lastdaymedia.store for merch. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. Constellation is a product of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show was conceived by and is directed and hosted by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is my brother, Dagan Moriarty. The show is produced by Last Stand's executive producer, Dustin Furman, and is edited by associate producer, Ben Smith. All Last Stand theme music is by Ramon Narvaez, and all of our graphics and logos are by Dagan Moriarty. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's podcasts, including Constellation, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest support tier, and we're infinitely grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor.